Indeed, he was the unluckiest one here. First, he was hunted down for no apparent reason, and then he fled to Lake Marsh Mountain. This place was rumored to be where the divine beasts, the turtle and the serpent, were sealed. They were once the overlords of the early Qixin temple. However, these rumors had been circulating for tens of thousands of years, and no one took them seriously. Even if they were truly sealed here, they wouldn't be able to break the restrictions of the two-faced Buddha. He fled to this place, hoping to use the terrain to escape. Halfway through his escape, he discovered that countless wild beasts were also fleeing. He thought his luck had finally turned, and that he could slip away amidst the chaos. But before he could feel any relief, a giant flood dragon appeared in front of him. Based on its appearance and the descriptions he had heard, he immediately recognized it as the serpent of the Qixin realm. It was one of the two great overlords of the Qixin temple. Wherever the serpent of the Qixin realm was, the turtle of the Qixin realm wouldn't be far behind. The turtle and the serpent. These two divine beasts were beings that even ordinary Tao lords couldn't escape from, let alone this group of small fry. Despair gripped them all. Fortunately, the turtle and serpent had only just broken free from their seals, so their strength wasn't at its peak yet. At that moment, they were devouring the wild beasts while also hunting down this group of human cultivators. Once they regained even half of their power, there would be no escape for them. Upon hearing about the two divine beasts, Nine Dust and Zhang and I turned pale as death. This time, they were truly in danger. Jian Wushuang wasn't here, so the targets given to them weren't that significant. Even if they couldn't win, they could at least run away. But now that they had encountered Tao lords, their chances of survival seemed slim. Earlier, they had sensed the enormous disturbance erupting from the direction of the two-faced god mountain, and had thought Jian Wushuang definitely wouldn't have the time to come and save them. They could only rely on themselves now. In an instant, everyone was desperately fleeing. They were wildly squeezing out every bit of power from within. Only Shui Yang appeared increasingly calm. Although he was slow-witted after spending years with Jian Wushuang, he had come to understand his nature. If Jian Wushuang had placed them in this area, then this place didn't pose any major threat. The two divine beasts had been sealed for ages, and nothing had changed for tens of thousands of years. But just as they were about to reach safety, the turtle and serpent broke free from their seals. Someone was definitely behind this. Only Jian Wushuang had both the strength and the time to do something like this. If it were a stranger, there would be no need to act this way. Besides, an ordinary Tao master couldn't break through the restrictions set by the dual-faced Buddha. At this thought, Shui Yang cursed Jian Wushuang inwardly. He didn't voice his suspicions directly, knowing full well that Jian Wushuang was using this to train them, or more specifically, to train Zhang and I. Shui Yang himself was a universe master. Following his original path was enough. He would fill in any gaps wherever necessary. The path of reconstruction left no room for regrets. At this stage, what he needed wasn't more tempering but treasures and the opportunity for enlightenment. It wasn't about that life-and-death experience. As for Immortal Jiuquan, Shui Yang figured that Jian Wushuang had probably obtained some treasure in the Divine Fire Hall and kept Jiuquan by his side to repay a debt. He guessed right on that one. If Jian Wushuang knew this, he would definitely praise Shui Yang for his insight. Finally, there was Zhang and I. She had been born into the mortal world. In the past, both he and Jian Wushuang had fooled her into fleeing to the eastern lands, primarily to trick Zhang and I. Later, however, Shui Yang discovered that Zhang Ni's mother might actually have some connection to Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang was a supreme powerhouse among the universe gods and had quietly entered this realm. It wouldn't be surprising if he had some old acquaintances here. This too didn't surprise Shui Yang. Jian Wushuang had created the situation with the turtle and the snake to nurture Zhang and I. He and Immortal Jiuquan were merely background characters. No, I'm more like a protector. Shui Yang's eyes gleamed with a strange light. While fleeing at high speed, he glanced back. The snake from the Qixin temple spat a stream of brown liquid. It moved incredibly fast, and although its power was average, it was laden with poison. He couldn't afford to be careless. He adjusted his stance, holding Zhang and I in one hand and Jiuquan in the other. With a sudden burst of strength, he hurled them both tens of thousands of miles away. Then, with another surge of energy, he caught up with them almost instantly. Meanwhile, a six-step true immortal named Xianxia was battling fiercely, but someone had led him into the path of the brown liquid. Though most of it missed, a tiny bit splashed onto him, causing his body to disintegrate on the spot. The poison not only corroded his body but also ate away at his origin source. "Ah!" Xianxia's agonizing screams echoed, but his survival instincts still pushed him to flee. He ignited his blood essence, transforming into a streak of blood, burning 90% of his origin source to escape. In an instant, he disappeared from sight, surpassing Shuiyang and the others in speed. However, the power he had burned was too much. Even if he managed to escape, it would take a long time for him to recover. More importantly, the burst of speed was too brief. He hadn't made it out of Lake Zhe Mountain before his body, composed of condensed origin source, fell into the lakebed from a thicket. On the other side, Zhang Anai and Zhou Chun didn't even have time to thank Shuiyang before they noticed that Xianxian had vanished without a trace. Now, the Qishan Temple snake targeted only the three of them. It no longer devoured the wild beasts. Suddenly, the pressure of their escape intensified. "Don't look back. Just keep running," Shuiyang shouted from behind them. His combat experience far outstripped that of Zhou Chun and Zhang Anai. He knew that the more they looked, the more terrified they'd become. It would affect their state of mind. Zhang Anai couldn't help but worry. "Senior Shuiyang, are you all right from earlier?" She had seen clearly how the brown liquid had corroded Xianxian. "I'm fine." Shuiyang shook his head. However, there was a brown mark on his arm. Although the liquid hadn't touched him directly, the toxic fumes had still corroded his arm. Fortunately, it was only a flesh wound and didn't affect his speed. The three of them were so focused on fleeing that they failed to notice the massive figure chasing them from the depths of the water. When the moment was right, and they were distracted, countless sharp bone spikes suddenly shot up from beneath the surface. They moved so fast that even a six-step true immortal would find it impossible to dodge. Zhou Chun, with his heightened senses, was the first to feel the impending danger. He spun in midair, his face pointing downward, and caught sight of the deadly spikes. "Watch out! Dodge!" he shouted as he pushed Zhang and I away. A spike grazed his cheek, its icy sharpness slicing off half of his head. The gruesome scene left Zhang and I no time to process what had happened. Before she could react, Shuiyang grabbed her arm and yanked her to the side. Three more bone spikes shot up from where she had just been standing. Zhang and I had barely regained her composure when she saw yet another spike pierce through Zhou Chen's chest. Zhou Chun, having saved her moments earlier, didn't have time to adjust his position. Already half of his head had been sheared off, and now, his slower reaction led to his body being impaled again. His aura plummeted instantly. "Senior Zhou Chun." Zhang Ni's heart trembled. Both Zhou Chun and Shuiyang had saved her. They had been injured because of her. "Go!" Shuiyang shouted, casting a glance at Zhou Chun, his eyes showing a hint of admiration. Jian Wushuang knew that immortal Zhou Chun, being a true spirit, deeply desired to transform into a human and become a cultivator of the human race. But now, in order to save Zhang and I, he had plunged himself into a deadly situation without hesitation. However, Jian Wushuang also knew that he wouldn't allow immortal Zhou Chun to perish. He carried Zhang and I and fled once again. Zhang and I struggled slightly. She wanted to do something. But when she saw that a part of Shuiyang's sleeve had already become empty, her eyes instantly turned red. Deep within her pupils, a green dot emerged. Her entire body froze. Sensing Zhang Ni's change, Shuiyang's lips curled into a faint smile before he suddenly vanished. The Qijing serpent, which had somehow appeared ahead of them, was the reason for his disappearance. Behind them, hundreds of bone spikes were also hurtling through the air. Shuiyang had no choice in that moment. He could only use one hand to push Zhang and I out of the encirclement of the two forces. In doing so, he lost his best chance to escape. Zhang and I live well. Escape! At that moment, even though Shuiyang seemed to be acting a bit dramatic, He genuinely wanted to witness how this young girl, who had just come of age, would walk the path of a powerful cultivator, from the emperor of the mortal world to someone of true strength. He hoped that this experience would help her elevate her state of mind and, after surviving this life-and-death ordeal, perhaps she would gain some insight into the origin source. Though he knew that this was a crisis Jian Wushuang had orchestrated. If that day truly came, Shuiyang might do the same, risking everything to save someone. It depended on who that someone was. If it had been Xing Luo whom he pursued, he would have done it. At that moment, a powerful aura surged from within Shuiyang. His entire being erupted, fists clenched, and with a furious roar, he charged straight at the Qijing serpent. As Zhang and I watched Shuiyang charge forward without regard for his own life, the green in her eyes suddenly expanded. It filled her entire gaze. The green dot transformed into a sword. At that moment, she stopped in her tracks, holding the divine sword in reverse, her body trembling. A powerful energy enveloped her entire being. She had never felt such a strong desire to become powerful. It was an endless drive. Only when a cultivator felt utterly powerless did the belief in their heart grow stronger. This was Zhang Ni's state at this moment. Before, she had always followed the conventional path. This time, after being thrown into the Twin Gods' palace by Jian Wushuang to hunt down a true immortal, she had gone through battle after battle. Thanks to Shuiyang and Immortal Zhou Chen's care, she hadn't faced much pressure. In her heart, she only thought about making up for her shortcomings in her next retreat. She had never considered how far she wanted to go. But now she had a goal. She wanted to become so powerful that nothing could threaten her. As she felt Immortal Zhou Chen's aura fade away, and watched Shuiyang sacrifice himself to cover their retreat, his body being corroded by the brown venom, his anguished cries of unbearable pain ignited the path to strength deep within her heart. The sword in her hand, she didn't know when it had turned green. It was the breath of life, the sword of life. This was the swordsmanship that Jian Wushuang had passed down to Zhang and I. It contained the billionth part of the essence of his life sword. Originally, according to Zhang Ni's talent, it would have taken her 1,000 years to comprehend. But now, within 100 years, she had fully mastered it. Don't underestimate this billionth part. Once she comprehended and mastered it, she would only be one step away from the ultimate swordsmanship. The final step was also the simplest one, and Jian Wushuang could still guide her. Success wasn't difficult at all. The hard part was this life slash. Mastering the essence was one thing, but slashing out its meaning was another. Hidden among the tree roots, Jian Wushuang was shouting in his heart, "Slash it out! Slash it out!" Shuiyang, who was suffering from the torment of venom, was shouting too, but he was just cursing Jian Wushuang. Zhang and I took a deep breath. She didn't follow Shuiyang's suggestion to flee, but instead prepared to fight with all her might. Back when Jian Wushuang taught her this strand of sword intent, he had said that once she mastered and unleashed this slash, it would be enough to kill a Dao Lord, because this was the life sword. Zhang Ni's body carried the bloodline of Zhang Shang, making her most sensitive to the power of life. She also had the root of life within her. Cultivating the life sword was the most suitable path for her. As long as Zhang and I continued on this path and reached its peak, although she didn't possess Jian Wushuang's extreme origin, she could rely on the ultimate swordsmanship origin source. By cultivating the life sword to perfection, she would still be able to slay universe gods below the 7 stars. Jian Wushuang's 9 swords of the starry sky wasn't something anyone could learn. The life sword required the power of life, the ultimate swordsmanship, and the starry sky origin source. Zhang and I had the first 2, and it was already quite remarkable that she could unleash half of the life sword's original power. In Jian Wushuang's view, the core of the life sword was life itself. Swordsmanship was only secondary. This was the greatest help to Zhang and I, because her natural talent was in the Tao of life. Swordsmanship was something she learned later. This was why Jian Wushuang had passed on this sword to her. Now, it was up to Zhang and I to see if she could slash it out. When her trembling hands stopped shaking, and the sword in her hand no longer hummed, the entire world seemed to quiet down. Zhang Ni's eyes turned completely green, and in her gaze, The life of the entire world lay under her sword. She swung it and slashed everything. With the original belief she held, she no longer hesitated. Raising her hand, holding the sword and slashing, it was all done in one fluid motion. The mighty green sword energy swept across 1,000,000 miles. The power was so immense that if Jian Wushuang hadn't blocked it, it would have alarmed Yang Dingtian and the others. Zhang and I had indeed slashed it out, and it had even exceeded Jian Wushuang's expectations. It was stronger than he had anticipated. It had reached the point where it could kill a top-tier Dao Lord. Although it couldn't completely destroy the two divine beasts, it was enough to severely wound and repel them. The sword energy spread, imbued with the true meaning of life, piercing through the two towering divine beasts. Roar! A miserable howl ended the battle. Shui Yang's body had already disappeared. The two divine beasts sank into the depths of the lake. The entire world fell silent, leaving only Zhang and I standing there. Her previously stern and sharp face suddenly shifted. At the moment she lost her opponents, a sense of emptiness welled up inside her. She believed that both Shui Yang and Immortal Zhou had perished. They had both died to save her. A deep sadness surged in her heart, the green in her eyes fading away, replaced by sorrow and crystal-clear tears. At that moment, Zhang and I was nothing more than a helpless little girl, crying her heart out. She wanted to scream, to call for her mother, to call for Jian Wushuang, to call for Immortal Zhou and Shui Yang. In the distance, 3 figures were watching Zhang and I. One of them, an elder in black robes with a stern face, looked worried and said, "Jian Wushuang, aren't you being too harsh on her? This little girl Zhang and I has only lived for a little over 100 years. She still has many shortcomings in her temperament." Shui Yang also felt that Jian Wushuang was being too severe and said, "Sometimes, when nurturing the younger generation, you can't rush things. She spent 90% of that 100 years in closed-door cultivation, lacking experience in the mortal world. This has caused her character to remain unchanged. If I didn't make these arrangements, she'd suffer more in the future," Jian Wushuang said calmly. This time, Jian Wushuang pressured Zhang and I to make her understand the path she needed to take. It was the path of the strong. The strong walk alone. There could never always be someone by her side to protect her. The last time she parted ways with family was with Zhang Shang. But back then, Zhang and I was too young to understand why they had to separate. At its core, it was due to a lack of strength. If her strength had been great enough, would Zhang Shang have left? Although Jian Wushuang did not know why Zhang Shang left the Crimson Eyes realm or why she had been separated from Zhang and I for such a long time, even instructing her not to seek her out, he understood that it was because Zhang Shang was not powerful enough. Zhang Ni's cultivation and her Dao heart had entirely depended on her mother, Zhang Shang. It was like the driving force behind her progress. But that wasn't good. One day, when she finally found Zhang Shang, her resolve would scatter. Therefore, before Zhang and I could reunite with Zhang Shang, her character had to be reshaped. Rescuing her mother was just a side mission. There were far more important tasks awaiting her. At the beginning, familial ties did serve as a strong motivation for cultivation. Jian Wushuang had been the same. Even now, he still held onto the bond of master and disciple as a source of drive. But the greater belief was in becoming the strongest. To become the mightiest. This was Jian Wushuang's path. He understood better than anyone how to cultivate the strong. Now, in nurturing Zhang and I, he merely applied his own understanding. Although many might not understand why Zhang and I was being burdened with so much, part of the reason stemmed from Jian Wushuang's sense of guilt toward Zhang Shang. Another part was because Zhang and I would carry many burdens in the future. Hui Qing's strength spoke for itself, and naturally, his daughter could not be a weakling. The path of the strong was the right one. The future of the world was unpredictable. Even universe gods could fall. What hope would the weak have? Thus, one must always strive for greater strength. And as for Zhang Shang, even Jian Wushuang couldn't discern her exact role in this world, clearly showing that she was entangled in some troubles of her own. Zhang and I had both her parents to look up to, so it was natural for her to work hard. Rescuing her mother, breaking through this world, and heading toward the realm god continent to reunite her parents. This too was a source of motivation. However, if this were told to Jiang and I now, it could backfire. After all, Jiang and I had no real emotional connection with Hui Qing. All that tied them together was their bloodline. Thus, it couldn't be revealed. When the time was right, it would not be too late to speak of it. Jiang Ni's performance just now had greatly satisfied Jian Wushuang. Although her mind had been in turmoil, she had reached the point of touching the origin source due to the breakthrough she made in the face of danger. She wasn't far from the ultimate swordsmanship. The rest would require his slow guidance. All right, it's time to go. I'll leave a mark on Jiang and I. She'll be fine. After saying that, Jian Wushuang took Shui Yang and Immortal Jiuchun and slowly disappeared into the void. As for Jiang and I, she would have her own path to walk. She shouldn't follow him blindly. Staying by his side would mean there was never any danger. Moreover, if Jiang and I discovered that Shui Yang and Immortal Jiuchun hadn't fallen, it wouldn't restore her peace of mind. Instead, it would shatter it even further. It was better to take this opportunity to leave Jiang and I on her own to venture forth. Secretly guiding her would be far better than keeping her by his side. Because Jiang and I had already passed the outburst period, what he needed now was enlightenment. Enlightenment wasn't something that could be achieved with just a few pointers. Moreover, even if enlightenment arrived, it would weaken one's thought power due to external influences. Only constant stimulation could awaken a person's true potential. Xianxia and Immortal Jiuchun were different. One was a super powerhouse among universe masters, and not far from becoming a universe god. Furthermore, he was a prodigy from a noble family, with the most perfect path laid out for him. As for Immortal Jiuchun, he was a true spirit crafted by a semi-divine being. His peak thought power wasn't any weaker than a special life form, and his physical body was made from the flesh of a peak-level special life form in the universe. He also carried the complete inheritance of the Master of Divine Fire in his mind. Naturally, he didn't need to take too many risks. As long as they were given enough treasures, it wouldn't be difficult for these two to cultivate all the way to the level of Universe Master. This time, Jian Wushuang's haul was substantial, and he had obtained a large number of treasures, most of which were given to his physical body. At the Mahapranerva, a realm, the peak level of life was around 2 million times that of an ordinary life form. Further improvement wasn't possible. It wasn't that his soul couldn't bear it, but rather that this realm couldn't bear it. To go higher, he needed the support of powerful origin source. In other words, Jian Wushuang needed to become an immortal true immortal before his physical body could fully surpass the 2 million-fold threshold. At that time, he wouldn't just have temporary bursts of strength, but rather permanent power. If his physical body level exceeded 5 million-fold, he would need the augmentation of a divine body. These were specific requirements. They couldn't be altered. No matter how many more treasures were invested, it was impossible to increase further. So he stayed at that level. The remaining treasures were given to Xianxia and Immortal Jiuchun to help them reach the immortal level sooner. At that point, with the help of the treasures, they could be directly pushed to Tao Master Perfection. As for becoming unified Tao, that was beyond his control. At that point, it would depend on their own fortunes. It wasn't that Jian Wushuang feared they would fail, but he worried that the time required would be too long. Forget it. It's not time to worry about them. I'm stuck myself. Jian Wushuang shook his head helplessly. His speed as he traversed the void was extremely fast. Within a quarter of an hour, he had left the two-faced god's mansion. After leaving, he didn't immediately leave the ancient sea domain, but instead headed to Temple City. He captured a strong expert from the Divine Eye clan, one who had cultivated the Divine Eye technique to its third transformation. He needed to study it carefully. As soon as he entered Temple City, he sensed several strong auras in the city's teleportation array. Originally, he had planned to retreat and cultivate in Temple City for a while, but upon arriving, he realized that two forces had already descended. One side belonged to the powerhouses from the sacred lands, while the other side consisted of experts from the ancient court. Outside the teleportation array, the two forces met. Other than releasing their auras, neither side spoke. They merely exchanged glances before rushing together toward the two-faced god's mansion. Clearly, they were after that piece of chaos supreme treasure. Jian Wushuang hadn't taken that treasure. He had left it on Two-Faced God Mountain. He didn't care much for that kind of treasure. Aside from the universe arc, he no longer cared about such trivial items. After all, his harvest this time had been substantial. He had collected quite a few valuable treasures. After the two forces of experts had left, Jian Wushuang visited a treasure pavilion, where he sold off some useless trinkets. He exchanged them for 30 billion immortal crystals and also obtained a batch of origin source. These were for Xianxia and Immortal Jiuqin. He also acquired 2 sets of peak-level supreme treasures. Once these two reached Tao Master Perfection, with the help of these treasures and the complete divine eye inheritance he had passed down, their combat power wouldn't be any weaker than an ultimate Tao Master. In the future, no matter what troubles they encountered, they would be able to help him. After finishing all this, Jian Wushuang made his way to God Mountain. This time he changed his appearance and aura. Though his looks remained similar to before, his aura now matched that of a 9-step true immortal. Thus, the person receiving him was also a 7-step true immortal from the mountain's peak. Senior, the mountaintop is divided into. A young-looking female immortal with formidable strength stepped forward and began to explain proactively. Jian Wushuang waved his hand and interrupted. Reserve a Jiazi-numbered cave mansion for me. Here are 10 Jiazi worth of immortal crystals. After speaking, he casually tossed the crystals to her, his demeanor cold, clearly not welcoming any further conversation. The female immortal, having encountered many like him, understood that this type of person disliked idle chatter. Without hesitation, she led Jian Wushuang to a cave mansion situated along a cliff. Jian Wushuang was satisfied. With a flicker of his figure, he entered the cave mansion. The moment he stepped inside, the door of the cave mansion slammed shut with a booming sound. The lamps within the cave mansion instantly lit up. He exhaled a long breath and slowly closed his eyes. At the same time, a wave of thought power entered the 9-prison pagoda. The first level. It was divided into 2 worlds. One was a cave world he had created, meant for Shuiyang and the others to train in. At that moment, the cave world was bustling with activity. The 10 true immortals and 4 guardians under the command of the twin-faced Buddha had all gathered. To be cautious, Jian Wushuang had not immediately released these individuals but had left them in the cave world instead. Along the way, they could also provide some entertainment for Shuiyang and Immortal Jiuqin. But the entertainment he referred to wasn't for them to play games with the two. Instead, it was for these true immortals to suppress their powers and take turns sparring with the two, helping them grasp the origin source more quickly. After sorting that out, Jian Wushuang entered the main world of the first level. There, the slumbering Luan was still present. Jian Wushuang's figure floated over, and with a thought, the suppressive force dissipated. The moment it did, Luan, who had been sealed and asleep, immediately regained consciousness. Realizing he was in an entirely unfamiliar world, Luan lifted his head and stared at Jian Wushuang in surprise. "Who exactly are you? Why are you targeting my divine eye clan?" Luan asked angrily. To him, Jian Wushuang was undoubtedly a sworn enemy of the divine eye clan. Furthermore, the fact that Jian Wushuang had suppressed him here clearly indicated malicious intent. He had already made up his mind. He would rather die than speak. Seeing his intense reaction, Jian Wushuang raised his hand slightly and said calmly, "Luan, would you like to hear a story?" "Humph. Say whatever you want, but I won't tell you anything." Luan turned his head away in defiance. Jian Wushuang found his response amusing and proceeded to recount the story that the giant gods I had told him. Though he embellished the details slightly for effect, it was a story filled with helplessness. The protagonist of the story had no choice but to make agonizing decisions in a situation akin to a trial by fire. In the end, to save more lives, the protagonist abandoned his own clan. After listening, Luan's expression began to change. Jian Wushuang had been very clear. The reason the Divine Eye clan was wiped out wasn't due to the strength of their enemies. In the starry sky, the star spirits were the true rulers. The Divine Eye clan had been the pinnacle race created by the star spirits. Who would dare to annihilate them? It could only have been the star spirits themselves. Jian Wushuang faced the creation of the star spirit. Speaking of the star spirit might confuse Yiluan, so Jian Wushuang directly referred to the creator of the Divine Eye clan. That's impossible. You're lying to me. You made up this story just to probe the secrets of my Divine Eye clan. Yiluan retorted angrily. Jian Wushuang didn't bother explaining further. He flipped his hand and pulled out a token, upon which a massive eye was carved. Casually, he tossed the token to Yiluan. Take a look for yourself. This is the complete 9 transformation secret technique of your Divine Eye clan. Now think, who in the entire Divine Eye clan has the right to possess such a token? Jian Wushuang crossed his arms, completely unhurried. Yiluan grabbed the token, sensing the familiar yet awe-inspiring aura from it. His entire being trembled. That aura stirred up his memories. It brought him back to the era that belonged to the Divine Eye clan. At that moment, Jian Wushuang's thought power activated, and the aura of the 9-prison pagoda silently descended. The rules of the first layer began to function. At this point, Jian Wushuang could connect with Yiluan's consciousness, including his thoughts and memories, as well as the Divine Eye secret technique he had cultivated. At that moment, everything about Yiluan was laid bare before Jian Wushuang. In truth, Jian Wushuang didn't need to tell Yiluan any story at all. He only felt pity for him and a bit of guilt, so he decided to tell him the truth. He urged them not to waste their time here but to try and continue cultivating. Perhaps one day they might be able to escape. After absorbing Yiluan's consciousness, Jian Wushuang no longer paid attention to him. The first 3 transformations of the Divine Eye secret technique now clearly manifested in his mind, changing from a hazy concept to one of complete clarity. This Divine Eye secret technique was truly worthy of being called the greatest forbidden technique in the starry sky. The first 3 transformations could amplify one's immortal power by 100-fold. If an ordinary Dao master fully mastered the first 3 transformations, by burning their immortal power, they could instantly unleash a 100-fold increase in combat power. In an instant, they could elevate themselves to become a peak Dao master. However, the first 3 transformations were extremely difficult to cultivate. In the entire ancient domain world, the number of Dao masters who could fuse 2 of the transformations of the Divine Eye secret technique could be counted on one hand. However, those who succeeded were immensely powerful. Their combat prowess was already extraordinary, and they were peak experts among Dao masters. After burning the Divine Eye secret technique, they could erupt with 10 to 20 times their usual power. How could that not be overwhelming? But burning immortal power ultimately consumed one's origin source of immortality. Only after becoming an emperor could one avoid depleting their origin source, because an emperor's origin source had already reached the level of controlling the heavenly Dao. Naturally, they wouldn't be affected by such depletion. Thus, the Holy Lord of the ancient domain world had walked down the wrong path of cultivation. In fact, the Holy Lord should have understood when the Divine Eye secret technique could be the main focus of cultivation and when it should only be supplementary. Yet, he had misguided cultivators, encouraging them to excessively cultivate the Divine Eye secret technique. When Dao masters fused 2 different inheritances, they could achieve the combat power of an extraordinary emperor after reaching the Dao fusion stage. In truth, even after becoming an emperor, cultivating the Divine Eye secret technique would still enhance combat power. However, there was one thing the Holy Lord was right about. At the true immortal stage, cultivators had just grasped the origin source, gaining a significant boost in comprehension. At this stage, cultivating the Divine Eye secret technique was indeed the fastest. After becoming an emperor, comprehension stagnated since their mastery was still limited to world-level origin sources, and their understanding was no longer as sharp as it had been at the true immortal level. To reach the next breakthrough, one would need to comprehend the origin source of the universe. So, while the Holy Lord's argument held some merit, Jian Wushuang couldn't fully agree. He still believed there should be a proper order of cultivation. Moreover, ordinary cultivators didn't need to rush when cultivating the Divine Eye secret technique. The 9 transformations of the divine secret technique could make someone as powerful as a world beast, capable of disregarding sheer power. But at the very least, one needed the willpower and physical body of a world beast to make it work. Ordinary cultivators certainly didn't have such conditions. However, Jian Wushuang did, which allowed him to cultivate the divine secret technique ahead of time. He didn't even need to cultivate it personally. As long as he captured enough powerful members of the divine clan, he could absorb more divine secret techniques from them. He could progress to the 9th transformation effortlessly. But to reach the 9th transformation of the divine secret technique, Jian Wushuang himself would at least need to become a universe god. Right now, it was beyond his reach. His capture of Yiluan this time was purely due to luck. Yiluan had ventured into dangerous territory, suffered serious injuries, and fled to the ancient domain world, where fate had led him into Jian Wushuang's grasp. If that Luan hadn't been injured, Jian Wushuang wouldn't have stood a chance against it. At its peak, that Luan had been an absolute powerhouse, a supreme being with 100-fold combat power. It was far stronger than most at the Tribulation Realm, and Jian Wushuang naturally wasn't its opponent. Let alone capturing it, he wouldn't even have had time to escape. This time, thanks to catching the Luan, his divine secret technique had advanced directly to the 3rd level, and he had also unlocked the first 3 layers of the 9-prison pagoda in one go. After comprehending the divine secret technique, he moved in a flash and went to the 3rd layer, eager to see what the world there looked like. When he entered, he was stunned to find that this place was practically a sacred land for cultivation. The energy was incredibly abundant, and its vastness could rival a cosmic secret realm. Even a whole race living here wouldn't feel crowded. It seems Senior Brother Ghost truly values his kin. Even though they were imprisoned, they were given a place where they could survive. Jian Wushuang ventured into the depths of the origin source of the 3rd layer, where cultivation was 1,000,000 times more effective than in the outside world. The 1st layer had been a world deprived of resources, with a size comparable to a large world. He hadn't yet explored the 2nd layer, but it was bound to be much better than the 1st. The 3rd layer, however, directly rivaled a cosmic secret realm. He couldn't even imagine what lay beyond this. It was simply too extravagant. No wonder a giant like the Star Spirit had assisted in refining the 9-prison pagoda back then. He guessed that the world on the 9th layer might even compare to the realm god continent. As this thought crossed his mind, Jian Wushuang shook his head abruptly. No, I'm falling into a stacking logic here. The 9th layer corresponds to the 9th level of the divine secret technique. Even among the divine clan, there probably aren't more than a handful of people who can cultivate the technique to the 9th level, right? That layer doesn't need to be as vast as the realm god continent. Just a river of space-time capable of accommodating universe gods and a universe-sized domain would be enough. He couldn't help but chuckle at his own thoughts. The world on the 3rd layer was so vast likely because it housed the most people. Almost every expert of the divine clan could cultivate the divine secret technique to the 3rd level, making it relatively easy for them. Hence, the 3rd layer was vast. With that thought, he prepared to take a look at the 2nd layer as well. Just as he turned to leave, a strange metal plate floated out from the depths of the origin source on the 3rd layer. Jian Wushuang frowned slightly and, with a gesture, grabbed the metal plate in his hand. Could this be something Senior Brother Ghost left for me? Jian Wushuang thought to himself. Looking at the metal plate in his hand, he noticed that was covered with peculiar patterns and various lines. It was profound, yet he had no clue what it meant. Though Jian Wushuang's current realm wasn't particularly high, his knowledge and insight were far from lacking. Even with the will of the realm beast within him, he couldn't make sense of the lines on the plate. For a moment, he doubted his own judgment. With just a single thought, his mind dove into the metal plate, and the lines on it seemed to latch onto his consciousness tightly. It was a strange feeling, like being in a state of enlightenment. Time flowed rapidly around him. If it hadn't been for the person in charge of the divine mountain reminding him to renew his lease, he wouldn't have even realized that 1,000 years had passed. The flow of time became clearer as he progressed, and after spending 3,000 years, he finally understood the meaning behind the lines on the metal plate. It was the life structure diagram of the realm beast. Or rather, it was a construction blueprint for the realm beast. He had only deciphered the life structure diagram, as well as the origin source diagram. Yet, a crucial part of the life structure diagram seemed to be missing. Damn! I should have gone through the layers one by one. This metal plate from the third layer isn't the first one. He sighed, feeling frustrated. He had wasted 3,000 years for nothing. Without hesitation, he flashed to the first layer. Sure enough, within the faint traces of the world's origin source, another identical metal plate emerged. After taking the metal plate, Jian Wushuang began studying the three patterns on it. Life, soul, and origin source. This time, he didn't find it as exhausting. In just 3 days, he completely comprehended them. Upon finishing his study of the first complete metal plate, a small dark golden sphere appeared within his sea of consciousness. On it was the image of an infant. Could this represent my age? Jian Wushuang felt a bit surprised. After comprehending the first metal plate, he didn't feel significantly stronger. However, his understanding of the realm beasts had deepened, and his progress in origin source had advanced rapidly. The increase in his combat strength seemed negligible, but his comprehension ability had greatly improved. Time to get the second one. Jian Wushuang's eyes gleamed with joy. He immediately set out for the second layer of the world. The power here wasn't as intense as the third layer, but the scope was far broader, like a broken universe. He didn't have time to admire the scenery. In that dilapidated origin source, he acquired the metal plate and immediately immersed himself in comprehending it. He accidentally began studying the third metal plate and somehow managed to comprehend the life diagram on it. This took him the longest, and there were still the soul and origin source diagrams left. The soul diagram was easier. He had the will of the realm beast, making it not too difficult to comprehend. But it still took him 3,000 years. The origin source diagram, however, was troublesome. He had no clue where to begin. Even with his extraordinary comprehension, it might take tens of millions of years. There was no helping it. He hadn't yet grasped the chaotic origin source. That origin source transcended the starry sky. It was naturally difficult. This second metal plate had 3 main diagrams. He fully comprehended the life and soul diagrams within a year, but he got stuck on the origin source. He remained stuck for 300 years. So that's how it is. That's how it is. Jian Wushuang, who had been sitting cross-legged in a desolate land, suddenly stood up. On this day, he had finally comprehended the origin source diagram on the second metal plate. Chaos is not truly chaos. Jian Wushuang closed his eyes slightly, feeling the satisfaction brought by the diagram. Chaos seems to go from existence to nothingness, and then from nothingness to existence again. To truly reach the highest realm of chaos, one must first abandon their original origin source. In that moment, Jian Wushuang broke through countless bottlenecks. Now, he had finally gained some understanding of the chaotic origin source. This could be considered the beginning. He had not yet gained the recognition of the chaotic origin source, but he could already wield the power of chaos, and his speed in comprehending it would be much faster from here on out. After fully understanding the 2 metal plates, he began to focus on the third one. The life diagram was already comprehended. Leaving only the soul and origin source, he chose the soul diagram. If he hadn't accumulated experience from the first 2 diagrams, it would have taken him at least 3,000 years to comprehend the soul diagram on the third metal plate. But now, it only took him a little over 100 years. Had he not previously comprehended the life diagram on the third metal plate, it might have taken him around 100 years as well. From this, it was clear that in the domains of soul, life, and origin source, his weakest understanding was in origin source. The third origin source pattern is too profound. If I force myself to comprehend it, who knows how many years it will take. This is too time-consuming. Simply understanding it through continuous efforts won't be enough. I must take the initiative myself. Jian Wushuang put away the metal board and began to comprehend the origin source. After once again reflecting on his ultimate origin source and the ultimate sword Dao origin source, he exhaled a long breath. Next, he was going to make a bold move. Sacrifice the Tao. He intended to sacrifice his original origin source. Then he would carve out a new path, a path of chaos origin source. Originally, he had been reluctant to part with his ultimate Tao and sword Tao. The ultimate Tao encompassed the myriad paths, and the sword Tao was the first among them. If he were to sacrifice both, it would be like cutting off his own arms and legs. If he failed to comprehend a satisfactory chaos origin source by then, it would be akin to cutting off his own power, rendering his combat strength useless. But Jian Wushuang had absolute confidence in himself. That's why he dared to be so bold. Let's begin. Buzz. 2 origin source seedlings rose from within him. These 2 origin sources had accompanied him for so long, and now he was about to sacrifice them. A deep reluctance stirred within his heart. But if the old doesn't go, the new won't come. Who would have thought that I'd also face such a trial of the Shura field, forced to make such a choice? Jian Wushuang chuckled bitterly. This choice, however, did not affect his Tao heart. As the thought arose, the dark golden sphere within his sea of consciousness suddenly trembled. The pattern of the infant above it began to shift as well. Boom! In the next moment, a mighty force instantly destroyed both the ultimate Tao and the sword Tao origin sources. Jian Wushuang passed out on the spot. The 2 origin sources, which had originally been a part of him, shattered completely and were subsequently absorbed by the dark golden sphere. In the end, not a trace of origin source energy remained in Jian Wushuang's body. The life, all things, death, space, time, and even the starry sky power encompassed by the ultimate Tao gone. The same applied to the sword Tao. Now only his original sword techniques remained in his mind, devoid of the sword intent they once carried. Everything was gone. He had sacrificed it all. Jian Wushuang felt as if his heart was being torn apart, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. Dizzy and lightheaded, the dark golden sphere in his sea of consciousness became exceedingly active. This signified his heightened sensitivity to the chaos origin source. The cultivation that would follow was now the most crucial moment. He had to tread cautiously in his exploration of the chaos origin source. Over the next 10 years following the sacrifice of his Tao, he finally gained the approval of the chaos origin source. By then, he had also comprehended the power of chaos from within the chaos itself. This power was no longer the same as the previous chaos power. It was the true power from the chaos realm. Back then, when he used chaos power within the starry sky, it had actually still been derived from the starry sky. It was not from the chaos realm itself. This was akin to using starry sky power within the space-time continuum. In fact, that power came from the starry sky forces that were intertwined with space-time. That power was ultimately impure. This was also why universe gods didn't use space-time power. Because universe gods were not space-time gods. Universe gods could unleash universe power to its most perfect level. The same applied to space-time gods. If they were to swap powers or both cultivate the strongest starry sky power, the combat strength they exhibited wouldn't increase because of it. On the contrary, it would weaken. This was one of the reasons for sacrificing his origin source. If Jian Wushuang had followed the original path, he could have reached the pinnacle of the starry sky. He could have become a superpower within the starry sky. But in the end, how far could he really go? Reaching the level of a star spirit messenger would have already been quite impressive. The god of time and space was a major obstacle. Even if he could surpass the starry sky god, he would still be at the limits of the starry sky. He would never be able to surpass the star spirits or that god king. Ultimately, he would never be the strongest. The old path was fine for others, but for someone like him, chosen by teacher Xianxia, it was the wrong path. He needed to forge a stronger path, a path beyond the starry sky. His limits were not merely the star spirits. He needed to become powerful enough to carve out his own starry sky. That was what it meant to be truly strong. My origin source has reached a bottleneck again. I should start comprehending the third origin source diagram. Jian Wushuang thought to himself and immediately summoned the third origin source diagram. This time, he felt no pressure while comprehending it. Although it wasn't as profound as the diagrams of life and soul, his speed was significantly faster than before. It only took him 5,000 years to fully comprehend it. This was beyond his expectations. After all, he had yet to fully master the chaotic origin source, so being able to comprehend the third diagram in 5,000 years was already impressive. After fully understanding the 3 metal plates, he finally had the time to study the material of the plates and their connections. These items were the most precious things he possessed. Without the metal plates, who knew how long it would have taken him to master the chaotic origin source? He had been searching everywhere for opportunities, only to find that the opportunity was right by his side all along. Hidden in plain sight, it was his carelessness back then that cost him so much time. If he had obtained the first metal plate earlier, he wouldn't have wasted so much time. This time, his retreat had lasted over 10,000 years. Thankfully, when it came time to extend his stay in the cave, he had directly thrown down 1 billion immortal crystals to buy the cave residence outright. At that time, he hadn't even asked for the price. He just threw the money at them, securing a permanent residence. During these 10,000 years, he had comprehended the 3 metal plates and mastered a new form of chaotic power. It was equivalent to being recognized by the chaotic origin source, and now he just needed to fully grasp it. Only by mastering the chaotic origin source could he wield infinite chaotic power. For the next stage, he split his consciousness into 2 parts. One part focused on studying the 3 metal plates, and the other continued to comprehend the chaotic origin source. From nothing to mastery, 10,000 years was already fast. After 100 more years of seclusion, he once again encountered a bottleneck on the path of mastering the chaotic origin source. However, he made a significant breakthrough with the metal plates. The 2 streams of consciousness fused into one. Before him floated the 3 metal plates, and Jian Wushuang couldn't hide the joy on his face. In these 100 years, he had thoroughly examined the plates, not even missing damage as small as a particle. At last, he had made a new discovery. Though, in hindsight, this discovery seemed almost obvious. When the 3 metal plates were stacked together, the overlapping and chaotic lines revealed the unique script of the God Eye clan. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but curse his ghost eye senior brother. He was truly too crafty. To think he had hidden it this deeply. If Jian Wushuang hadn't absorbed the memories of Yiluan and learned all the scripts of the God Eye clan, including the ancient language of the first generation, he wouldn't have noticed it at all. After translating all the characters, Jian Wushuang's mind began to work rapidly. After reviewing it over 1 billion times in just one day, and confirming that there were no errors in the hidden script, he finally started to savor the message that his ghost eye senior brother had left for him. Junior brother, by the time you see this letter, I assume you've already comprehended the origin source of disorder. First, let me congratulate you, junior brother. Understanding the origin source of disorder is the first step forward, and I'm already looking forward to our meeting in the future. The first few lines stirred something bittersweet in Jian Wushuang's heart. He thought of how his senior brother had schemed within the clan to help him. Yet, he hadn't comprehended the origin source of disorder, leaving him feeling guilty toward Ghost Eye senior brother. The second part of the letter read, I'm not sure what level of origin source you've comprehended, but most likely you realized it while studying the 3rd piece of the Xian Yi Codex. In that case, the origin source you've grasped is probably of a high-level realm beast. Although it falls just short of mine, I'm certain with your extraordinary talent, you'll make up for it in the future. This line came across as a bit arrogant, making Jian Wushuang's initial feelings of guilt vanish. I didn't expect my senior brother to be so full of himself. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but let a slight smile creep onto his face. His mood lightened. The 3rd part of the letter explained the hierarchy of the origin source, as Ghost Eye senior brother outlined its ranks. It was quite similar to those within the starry sky. No, it was the starry sky that mirrored the hierarchy of the realm beast's origin source. The categorization of origin sources in the land of disorder was straightforward and brutal. Elementary, intermediate, advanced, pinnacle, supreme, and sovereign. An elementary realm beast's origin source was the weakest. In the land of disorder, even the weakest realm beasts, who controlled the origin source of disorder, wielded the elementary origin source. Though these realm beasts could still stir up storms in the land of disorder and summon their paths at will, creating whatever they desired within their domain, the gap between them and a master of the high-level realm beast origin source was vast. For example, take two realm beasts. One possessed the elementary origin source, while the other wielded the high-level origin source. The sword Dao they condensed would differ in essence. A realm beast with an elementary origin source might only be able to summon a 5th-grade sword Dao. However, a realm beast with a high-level origin source could summon a 3rd-grade or even a 2nd-grade sword Dao. The disparity manifested in this fundamental difference. When Ghost Eye Senior Brother claimed he was slightly stronger, he was likely referring to the pinnacle-level realm beast origin source. Based on Jian Wushuang's understanding of Maluo Sa's origin source, he deduced that Maluo Sa's was a high-level origin source. Even with just a high-level origin source, Maluo Sa's power could devour pinnacle-level spacetime gods and even pose a threat to starry sky gods. A realm beast with a pinnacle origin source could likely rival a star spirit. From this, Jian Wushuang inferred that Ghost Eye Senior Brother's strength should be at the level of a star spirit. Combined with the immense power of Master Xian Yi and the treasures he held, Jian Wushuang felt more confident in Ghost Eye Senior Brother's abilities compared to that of a star spirit. So, does that mean, in the future, I'll have at least the battle power of a star spirit? Jian Wushuang licked his lips in anticipation. Jian Wushuang felt an inexplicable excitement deep in his heart. The power of the star spirits had always been something he yearned for. If he could reach the level of a star spirit, while he wouldn't say he would be fully satisfied, he would certainly be thrilled. There was also the matter of the Xuani scripture. The metal plate was called the Xuani scripture, and judging by the title, it was most likely something left behind by Master Xuani. It was probably a unique treasure. Apart from some boasting about the Chaos Land, Senior Brother Ghost Eye had instructed him to improve his strength as quickly as possible. Finally, he had reminded him to treat the Divine Eye clan kindly. That was something Jian Wushuang took to heart. If he didn't have to kill, he wouldn't. As long as they weren't utterly evil, he wouldn't strike them down. Besides, he still needed to bring the Divine Eye clan into his fold and open higher levels. At that time, there would be more Xuani scripture to enhance his understanding of the origin source. The Xuani scripture consisted of 3 initial volumes. Comprehending the first volume was equivalent to grasping the fundamentals of the origin source. Comprehending the second volume was equivalent to understanding the intermediate origin source. And if one could grasp the third volume, it would mean they had mastered the origin source of chaos, which was the highest form of origin source. At present, Jian Wushuang hadn't yet comprehended any origin source. He had initially been quite anxious about this. But now he wasn't in such a hurry anymore. The 4th volume of the Xuani scripture corresponded to the origin source of a top-tier realm beast. The 5th volume corresponded to the origin source of a peak realm beast. The 6th volume corresponded to the origin source of a realm beast king. Obviously, the further one progressed, the stronger the comprehension became. But it also grew increasingly difficult. He held deep admiration for Senior Brother Ghost Eye. Back then, no one had given Ghost Eye the 9-prison pagoda. Even with the complete Xuani scripture, without the assistance of the Divine Eye secret technique, it would have been much harder to comprehend the origin source of a top-tier realm beast. In that era, Ghost Eye must have painstakingly cultivated the Xuani scripture, mastering the 4th volume and comprehending the origin source of chaos. He continued to cultivate through the 9th volume, becoming a supreme existence and later creating the Great Divine Eye secret technique. This was because the Divine Eye secret technique was essentially an abbreviated version of the Xuani scripture. Jian Wushuang, having the Divine Eye secret technique, didn't even need the 9-prison pagoda. He could progress step by step through cultivation, then study the Xuani scripture. His current cultivation environment was far superior to that of Senior Brother Ghost Eye. Not to mention, he didn't need to spend time cultivating the Divine Eye secret technique. He could directly comprehend the Xuani scripture. Without the Divine Eye secret technique, it would have taken him hundreds of years just to comprehend the 1st volume of the Xuani scripture. The later stages would have been even more daunting. At this thought, Jian Wushuang couldn't even begin to imagine how Senior Brother Ghost Eye had managed to cultivate back then. The pain and difficulty must have been beyond imagination. Jian Wushuang felt more like a cultivator reaping the fruits of someone else's labor. Although the road ahead seemed like it required his own steps, in reality, it had all been paved by others. How to walk and which path to take had been carefully considered for him. And now, with the help of the divine I-secret technique, he could cultivate the Xuani scripture. One could say it was an ideal start. Strangely, now that I have a direction, I feel a bit of disappointment. Jian Wushuang sighed helplessly. Before, when he had no clue where to begin, he had been more anxious than anyone, constantly seeking an entry point. Now, having gained recognition from the origin source of the realm beasts, according to his calculations, the 4th or 5th volume of the Xuani scripture would enable him to master the origin source of chaos. And it would be a top-tier realm beast origin source. If he could master the origin source of chaos with the 5th volume of the Xuani scripture, that would be the peak realm beast origin source. Should he complete the first 6 volumes of the Xuani scripture, he would be able to master the origin source of a realm beast king. At the moment, Jian Wushuang knew next to nothing about the realm beast kings. But judging from the 12 star spirits in the starry sky and the divine king, he could infer their power. First, the high-tier realm beast origin source of Moresa was no match for the star spirits. Perhaps a top-tier realm beast origin source could rival a star spirit, but even then, it might not be a true match. From Jian Wushuang's deduction, the origin source of the star spirits came from the starry sky itself. When the starry sky was first established, countless realm beasts had fused with it. Among them, the divine king was the most powerful. He was likely a super realm beast who had mastered the origin source of a realm beast king. Next was the great priest, whose origin source likely matched the peak realm beast origin source. As for the remaining 11 star spirits, their origin sources were on par with top-tier origin sources. The words of the Titan star spirit revealed a sense of guilt toward Ghost Eye, as well as a hint of pride. It was clear that Ghost Eye had either matched or even surpassed the Titan star spirit. Otherwise, the Titan wouldn't have held him in such high regard. Based on his speculation, the God King had mastered the origin source of the King of Realm Beasts. If he wanted to become the first in the starry sky, he had to first master the origin source of the King of Realm Beasts. That battle back then, although my memory was erased, I saw the scene of defeat. Jian Wushuang clenched his fist. His eyes filled with determination as he said, "No matter what, I will win next time." Entering this world to rebuild himself felt like he was recultivating in the starry sky after failing in the land of disorder. There was an unspeakable connection between the two. But he would seize the perfect opportunity. He was determined to become the strongest. The origin source of a higher-level realm beast. It was indeed powerful, and upon mastering it and reaching the pinnacle, one could become an existence like Morosa. However, Jian Wushuang had witnessed beings even more powerful than Morosa, so he naturally did not care for that. The star spirits were not his goal, nor was the God King. What he aimed for was to surpass everything. He even sought to surpass his own master, Xianxia. Only by doing so could he win it all. Now that I've comprehended the 3rd volume of the Xianxia scripture, I'm just a step away from mastering the origin source of disorder. When I delve into the Xianxia scripture next time, I might unknowingly grasp it. He began to worry about cultivating the 4th volume of the Xianxia scripture. If, by chance, he comprehended the origin source of a top-tier realm beast during an epiphany, it would be a great loss. Therefore, he had to prepare in advance. When it came to controlling his level, he had experience. If one wanted to grow stronger, they had to be ruthless. To suppress himself, he first had to cripple himself. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. He had never been afraid of being ruthless. Without any hesitation, he immediately obliterated the strand of disorderly power he had painstakingly mastered. He sacrificed it completely. Of course, that was far from enough. Being ruthless didn't necessarily mean becoming stronger. Besides obliterating his mastered disorderly power, he also began to comprehend each rule within the disorder. In meticulous detail, from one main path, countless branches diverged. The difficulty of mastering the origin source instantly increased by several levels. After completing all this, he finally felt at ease. He exhaled deeply, but suddenly sensed something was wrong. He was still far from unlocking the fourth layer. As for the fourth transformation of the divine eye technique, relying on his own insight to comprehend it would take a million, even tens of millions of years. Because of the 9-prison pagoda, he didn't need to comprehend the divine eye technique. However, he still had to capture a powerful expert from the divine eye clan. To unlock the fourth layer, he needed an expert from the divine eye clan who had cultivated the divine eye technique to the fourth transformation. But he had also found 2 other paths through his senior brother, Ghost Eye's words. The first was still to capture an expert from the divine eye clan, but the requirements were lower. To unlock the fourth layer, suppressing 100 divine eye clan cultivators who had perfected the divine eye technique would also work. In other words, he had to suppress 100 experts like Ilwan, a divine eye clan expert. When he saw this requirement, he realized there wasn't much hope. With his current strength, it was simply impossible. Moreover, he had just sacrificed his disorderly power. That was his only strong combat method in the early stages. He had sacrificed it to control his level. It wasn't a big deal since it was for the sake of becoming stronger. But there was no need to sacrifice it so early. It would have been better to wait until he unlocked the fourth layer before sacrificing his disorderly power. Jian Wushuang felt a wave of regret. Now that he no longer had disorderly power, he could still handle emperors, but against someone like the Holy Lord or the Ancient Courtmaster, he was definitely no match. After all, he was only at the peak of the Great Completion stage. If he still had the power of disorder, he might still stand a chance in battle. But now that the power of disorder was gone, at most, he could only match the strength of a 4th-tier emperor. Great Completion stage equivalent to a 4th-tier emperor. If anyone heard that, they definitely wouldn't believe it. But for Jian Wushuang now, that strength was far too weak. Dealing with the Divine Eye clan is a bit unrealistic, and I can't even find any other members of the Divine Eye clan. Without a cosmic boat, relying solely on my speed, I can't even leave the ancient domain world, let alone travel across the universe. Jian Wushuang shook his head. In truth, he still had one more option, and that was to build his own force. To cultivate a force specifically aimed at the Divine Eye clan. Or to cultivate an organization that focused solely on dealing with practitioners of the Divine Eye secret technique. The second path that Senior Brother Ghost Eye had left for him was to suppress those strong individuals who cultivated the Divine Eye secret technique. But he would need to capture more. Because the people who practiced the Divine Eye secret technique were not pure practitioners. The first 5 stages were acceptable. Most worlds could cultivate them completely, except for the ancient domain world. After all, only one holy ground there transmitted the complete first 5 stages. Many claimed to have learned the Divine Eye secret technique from inherited sequences. It was too chaotic. Who knew how many strong cultivators practicing the Divine Eye secret technique he would need to capture? At least in the entire ancient domain world, there were only 4 emperors who had cultivated the second stage of the Divine Eye secret technique. Of those, 3 were only halfway there. Even if you included the Tao Masters, packing up the entire ancient domain world wouldn't be enough to match a single Nilwan. This path could wait until he roamed the universe and visited myriad worlds. For now, he still needed to pry some information out of Nilwan, at least to gain some direction. Or learn more about the internal situation of the Divine Eye clan. He had to be prepared for something. Lastly, there was his own issue. His strength wasn't enough. To grasp the origin of the Realm Beast King, he needed to open the 6th level of the 9-prison pagoda before mastering the origin, and that meant he needed a Divine Eye clan expert who had cultivated the 6th stage of the Divine Eye secret technique. Not to mention the 6th stage, even now, he couldn't defeat a practitioner who had mastered the 3rd stage of the Divine Eye secret technique. No, he couldn't even defeat a 2nd stage practitioner. The only reason he had gained an advantage was because of Nilwan, who had allowed him to make a windfall. The Divine Eye clan, with their secret method, were far stronger than ordinary clans. The 1st stage alone was invincible among Tao Masters, comparable to the strongest. Ultimate Tao Masters. A practitioner who had completed the 2nd stage was among the strongest emperors, with the weakest possessing the strength of a 4th tier, and the strongest reaching the level of a 6th tier emperor. A third-stage practitioner was a supreme expert, and Nilewan belonged to this level. A fourth-stage practitioner corresponded to the Tribulation realm. A fifth-stage practitioner was at the level of a universe master. The sixth stage likely corresponded to a sixth Tribulation universe master. Yet Jian Wushuang was just someone in the Great Completion stage who hadn't even grasped the origin. How could he possibly fight against a sixth Tribulation universe master from the Divine Eye Clan? Jian Wushuang lowered his head, contemplating his resources. He had the 9-prison pagoda, a weapon to suppress the Divine Eye Clan. If his strength were on par with theirs, he could use the 9-prison pagoda to completely crush any Divine Eye Clan expert. But the gap in power was too great now, nullifying any advantage from the 9-prison pagoda. Aside from the 9-prison pagoda, he had his realm lord's physical body and the soul and will of the realm beast. These were also shaky advantages. He could easily sweep through Dao Masters, but facing emperors below the 4th tier was already a challenge. With some time on his hands, he needed to carefully replan how to enhance his combat strength. At present, he didn't have many treasures left. He had already sacrificed both his Sword Dao and Extreme Dao. The power of disorder was also gone. He was left with only the advantages of his physical body and his soul and willpower. My body! Jian Wushuang blinked. That was mortal strength, and no matter how powerful it became, it would be useless. In the end, it was still necessary to aid the divine body for it to become truly valuable. As for his soul and willpower, this was indeed intriguing. My soul power is far stronger than that of an emperor or even a universe master. I can create a soul secret technique and, while I'm at it, forge a soul-related innate treasure that could at least unleash the power of a top-tier emperor. Jian Wushuang immediately began searching for the soul secret techniques he had cultivated in the past. Since none were suitable for his current needs, he split off a portion of his mind to create a universe-level soul secret technique. He was determined to showcase all his strengths. Having cultivated 3 volumes of the Xianxia Sutra, not only had his origin source grown stronger, but his physical body and soul had also been fortified. Now, there was still the matter of further enhancing his body. At that moment, he thought of the divine blood he had obtained. He pulled out a drop of silver divine blood, connecting it to his ability of being formless and shapeless, which allowed him to change his form at will. He realized he could transform into a powerful member of the Divine Eye Clan. Transform! With a flicker, he morphed into a member of the Divine Eye Clan. The Divine Eye Clan indeed resembled the world beasts in a way they both had a single eye. Reflecting on the appearance of the Titan star spirit, it looked remarkably similar to the single-eyed world beast. It wasn't surprising that the Divine Eye Clan's creator had fashioned them in this way. The appearance and abilities of the Divine Eye Clan were clearly custom-designed based on the creator's own image. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. He then began to study the silver blood. What exactly is hidden within this blood? Jian Wushuang pondered over it for quite some time, but he couldn't make out any clues. Just then, a voice transmission from the first layer world reached him, prompting him to pause. Has this guy finally come to his senses? Jian Wushuang smiled calmly. After leaving the other party hanging for so long, he wondered what kind of surprises awaited him. In the first layer world, at the center of a barren land, that one-eyed creature leaned against a damaged treasure, nurturing his body. Upon entering this place, he had discovered that his injuries were slowly healing. However, his combat strength remained suppressed. The sensation was indescribable, much like the words Jian Wushuang had spoken to him earlier. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang's figure appeared in the distance and approached with steady steps. As he drew near, Jian Wushuang tilted his head, glancing at the damaged treasure hovering behind the one-eyed creature, and remarked in surprise, "A damaged universe treasure? You've certainly got quite a collection of rare items on you." You! The one-eyed creature was utterly shocked at Jian Wushuang's sudden appearance. His eyes wide with disbelief. Jian Wushuang didn't immediately realize what the issue was and took a quick look around the area. What's wrong with you? Weren't you the one who called me here? The one-eyed creature stared at him in terror, stammering, You're also from the Divine Eye Clan. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but laugh. It was only then that he remembered he had transformed into a member of the Divine I clan and had forgotten to revert back. Having spent the last 10,000 years focused entirely on cultivation, he hadn't paid much attention to his appearance, sometimes even training in the form of a world beast. Realizing his mistake, Jian Wushuang decided to roll with it. Heh! I know all the secrets of the Divine I clan. If I weren't one of them, wouldn't that be even more shocking? But why would you suppress your own kind? Are you the creator of our Divine I clan? The one-eyed creature seemed to have stumbled upon an earth-shattering secret of his race. Jian Wushuang pretended to be solemn as he said, "I'm not like him." After speaking, he shook his head and sat quietly to the side, not initiating any further conversation. "By the way, why did you call me here?" he asked. "I was just testing to see if you were still here." Ilwan forced a bitter smile. Hearing that there was nothing wrong, Jian Wushuang turned around, pretending to leave. This time, Ilwan panicked a little. He was now more curious about his own tribe than Jian Wushuang was. "Wait!" Jian Wushuang's lips curled into a smile. He slowly turned around and said, "What? Do you think I have time to waste on your nonsense? Don't you want to know the whereabouts of the other Divine I clan members?" Ilwan probed. This time, Jian Wushuang's interest was piqued. He truly did want to know. Even if they were not his opponents, it was still important to be aware of where the Divine I clan's experts were, what their strength was, and what their internal structure looked like. "Speak. What do you want in exchange?" Jian Wushuang stopped, found a place to sit, and assumed a posture as if he were ready to negotiate. Ilwan's eyes darted around for a moment before he spoke. "I want to know your identity. Why are you suppressing the Divine I clan? Could it really be that you violated the supreme rules?" "You guessed right. I did indeed violate the supreme rules," Jian Wushuang admitted without any hesitation, nodding his head. This left Ilwan at a loss for words. He clearly didn't believe it. Before Ilwan could speak again, Jian Wushuang cut him off. "Now it's your turn to answer my question. Where did you encounter the Divine I clan's experts?" "You haven't told me your identity yet," Ilwan retorted. "My name is Jian Wushuang. I specialize in suppressing the Divine I clan as the Divine Emissary. If you don't believe me, there's nothing I can do." This time, Ilwan didn't argue. Instead, he nodded and said, "I believe you." He had no choice but to believe it now because, after mulling over what Jian Wushuang had said earlier, Ilwan felt that it might actually be possible. Moreover, after Jian Wushuang had suppressed him, he hadn't killed him or asked any further questions about the Divine I clan. During the tens of thousands of years that had passed, Ilwan had no idea what Jian Wushuang had been doing. He couldn't help but send him a telepathic message. Seeing that Ilwan had taken the bait, Jian Wushuang was in no hurry. He leisurely said, "Your strength is quite impressive. You have peak combat power, and your Divine I secret technique has reached the third transformation in its perfected form. If it weren't for your serious injuries, you would have had a great chance of becoming a tribulation-level expert. Your Excellency flatters me. I know my limits well. Before the Great Destruction, I had already reached the peak, but after so many years of recovery, I've made no progress. With this injury, I've long lost all hope," Ilwan said with a bitter smile, shaking his head. Indeed, his talent was quite average. His combat power relied on his clan's innate abilities and the Divine I secret technique. Otherwise, among the human race, he would at most be a fourth-stage emperor. On the realm god continent, he would be as common as dirt. Jian Wushuang, however, gave him hope. "If you were out in the world, you really wouldn't have any hope. But here you still have a chance. Not only can you recover from your injuries, but you also have the opportunity to take that crucial next step." "You must be joking," Ilwan scoffed. Seeing his disbelief, Jian Wushuang immediately shifted the space around them. From the first layer, they directly entered the third layer. Moreover, it was the origin source within the third layer. The power and origin source here were incredibly abundant, 1,000,000 times more potent than the outside world. One could say this was the very core of the entire universe. At first, Ilwan was astonished by Jian Wushuang's strength, as he could easily shift between spaces. He was also shocked by this treasure, which was specifically designed to suppress their divine eye clan, and its ability to shift locations at will. However, when he sensed the power here, his entire being instantly became invigorated. Jian Wushuang didn't hide anything from him and revealed some of the specific functions of the 9-prison pagoda. This time, Ilwan remained silent. He sat cross-legged in the depths of the origin source, not uttering a single word. Jian Wushuang knew the other was deep in thought. Thus, he wasn't in a hurry to threaten or entice him. He didn't even bring up the previous topic again. After an hour had passed, Jian Wushuang took out a teapot, brewing tea by himself. Finally having some rare free time, he naturally wanted to make the most of it. When Ilwan opened his eyes, he turned and glanced mockingly at Jian Wushuang, saying, "What's the point of just drinking tea? How about some wine?" Hearing his tone, Jian Wushuang immediately knew this guy was about to relent. "Sure. It's been a while since I've had any. I wonder if you have some good wine," Ilwan teased. Jian Wushuang really didn't have any wine. The tea set was something he had obtained from the hands of slain cultivators. But the wine had long been discarded. He thought it took up too much space. Without hesitation, he reached out with his thoughts and contacted the 4 guardians of the dual-faced Buddha. He managed to obtain 2 pots of fine wine. Casually tossing one pot to Ilwan, he watched as the other removed the cork, took a sniff, and then chuckled, "Let's stick with tea." Clearly, Ilwan wasn't impressed with the wine Jian Wushuang had given him. Truthfully, even Jian Wushuang wasn't satisfied with it. Back in the day, what kind of wine had he been drinking? A single pot of wine could rival the value of an entire universe, and it was even possible to brew wine using the resources of a universe. Now drinking this stuff was simply adding to his frustration. Tea, on the other hand, was fine. The more mundane it was, the more one could appreciate its subtleties. As they sipped tea, the two chatted leisurely. It was as though they were old friends who had known each other for years. This time, neither of them held anything back. Jian Wushuang only omitted information about his identity in the outside world and his cultivation path. Other than that, he concealed nothing. Ilwan, on the other hand, shared a great deal, holding back the least. This guy could really talk. Starting from his birth, he talked for 3 whole days and nights. The first 2 days were spent talking about himself, and on the last day he finally spoke of the Divine Eye Clan. From the mouth of a peak-level cultivator, Jian Wushuang seemed to glimpse a glimpse of that once great civilization. The Divine Eye Clan. They had spread throughout the starry sky, the dimensions of time and space, and the realm god continent. Ilwan was a member of a branch of the Divine Eye Clan located on the realm god continent. He hadn't lived for too long. Shortly after his birth, having reached the peak for less than 10,000 years, he encountered the Great Catastrophe. This was the source of the Divine Eye Clan's extinction. The realm god continent shattered. Nearly all of the Divine Eye Clan perished, because most of the clan's strongest members resided on the realm god continent. Thus, the realm god continent became the most heavily drained region at the time. Even if it hadn't been broken by the realm beasts, it would have been difficult to repair later on, and it still would have collapsed. After the realm god continent shattered, the surviving members of the Divine Eye Clan, as well as the deceased cultivators of the clan, were all sealed within this world. Ilwan didn't know the name of this place. He only knew that, after accidentally awakening, he had wandered aimlessly through countless worlds, entering this universe and exploring tens of thousands of realms. After encountering countless powerful figures, Jian Wushuang stood before the site of what was called the Nash Universe. The current universe was known as Nash Universe, and it housed the presence of a Universe Master. However, the Universe Master did not control this universe directly. Instead, they commanded a universe-level secret realm. Jian Wushuang wasn't surprised by this. A Universe Master did not necessarily need to govern a universe. Controlling a secret realm of the universe worked just as well. This was because the origin source of a secret realm and that of a universe were essentially the same, the only difference lay in the spatial range. Once one mastered a universe's secret realm, They could freely absorb its origin source. That was the key. Normally, a universe master who controlled a universe couldn't relocate it or absorb it into their body. Such feats were only possible after reaching the seventh tribulation realm. Still, there were some individuals who could accomplish this in advance, especially if they inherited a powerful legacy. In the past, the top 10 powerhouses of Qixin Temple had each been able to compress a universe into themselves. This was all thanks to the Realm King. Jian Wushuang guessed that in this world, such techniques didn't yet exist, except perhaps within the Divine Eye clan. With this newfound understanding of the Nash universe, Jian Wushuang formed a rough idea of the world. Universes were scattered across this realm, much like the flow of time and space. However, this world was completely cut off from the outside, making it an isolated dimension without a clear origin. In other words, it had been left behind after the fall of a time god. This dimension had given birth to thousands upon thousands of universes. As these universes shattered and cycled through reincarnation, they formed the Sea of Universes. On the other side of this Sea of Universes lay the source of this dimension, the remnant of the fallen time god, referred to as heaven. Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed slightly as he considered this. Heaven must be the heaven of the Wanlu world, and the Wanlu divine tree likely exists within this world. With heaven positioned at the origin of time, and the Wanlu divine tree being a life tree, its life force, though inferior to the world tree, would still be incredibly powerful. Vice left it behind and placed it at the source of this dead time-space dimension. It should easily be enough to revive the Divine Eye clan. But could they also be attempting to revive the fallen time god? Jian Wushuang silently speculated. But for now, such concerns were still far off. Getting out of the ancient domain world was trouble enough. The history of the Divine Eye clan was vague even to Na Ilwan. Before the Great Cataclysm, she only knew that their sacred land was located in the giant star district of the starry sky. Beyond that, her knowledge was limited. In the Realm God continent, the Divine Eye clan had many branches. 9 of these were the most powerful bloodlines, each one of them headed by an ancestor who was a universe god. Of course, these weren't just any universe gods, they were among the strongest, likely possessing the strength of at least 7 stars, since each had mastered the 8th transformation of the Divine Eye Secret Technique. The Divine Eye Secret Technique was a condensed version of the mysterious E-Sutra, but with the additional ability to burn one's divine power, an act so defiant of the heavens that it had become a revered and eternal legacy. Every time Jian Wushuang thought about it, he couldn't help but admire his ghost eye senior brother once again. Back to the topic at hand. Besides the 9 peak bloodlines, Na Ilwan mentioned there were many branches of the Divine Eye clan, all established by universe gods. She herself came from one of the 9 peak bloodlines, the Femo lineage. Femo was the powerful universe god who had founded this bloodline. Although Femo had fallen, there was still a chance of resurrection. According to Jian Wushuang's theory, universes beneath heaven couldn't birth universe gods, nor could they withstand one. It was highly likely that the Divine Eye clan's universe gods were all residing in heaven. Jian Wushuang wasn't in a rush. By the time he had to deal with these figures, he would have already mastered the origin source. Would he fear them then? Once he mastered the origin source, he could ascend to Tao Lord in one step. Afterward, he would begin preparing for the Tao fusion. The issue of Tao fusion wasn't difficult for him. He could skip the Emperor level entirely. Once he reached the ultimate pinnacle, all he would need was his gray jar to continuously devour universes. He would keep consuming them until he reached the 9th tribulation realm. By then, when he regained his peak strength, he could shatter this entire world with a single punch. He thought optimistically, though not overly so, since no one could predict what unforeseen events might happen. Even among the Divine Eye clan's branches, some universe gods were still formidable. It was now the stage of the universe masters. These guys were likely beneath the heavens. Jian Wushuang had to be cautious of this. Na Ilwan had also mentioned a lot about the universe masters within the clan. Unfortunately, he hadn't encountered any of them. The universe masters in the clan, along with the emperors, were all assessed based on their strength in the secret technique of the Divine Eye. Jian Wushuang found this interesting. You said, "Is there anyone in the Divine Eye clan who, at the Tao Master level, has cultivated the secret technique of the Divine Eye to the fourth turn?" Upon hearing this, Na Ilwan immediately shook his head and said, "How could that be possible? The fourth turn is for emperors. Even among emperors, those who cultivate to the fourth turn are considered geniuses. The geniuses among Tao masters can only reach up to the third turn at most." "Are you that certain?" Jian Wushuang feigned disbelief. Although he had relied on luck in some instances, if he hadn't, he would have been able to perfect the second turn during his grand completion stage and could likely have achieved the third turn through his own comprehension. Besides, there were many ordinary people in the ancient domain who had fully cultivated the first turn. He really didn't think it was that difficult. Na Ilwan's eyes lit up as he said, "Don't say that. I have heard of a genius in the Divine Eye clan who perfected the third turn of the secret technique of the Divine Eye during their mundane phase. But there hasn't been any news of them since." "Ha, you've just never been to the sacred land of the starry sky. Who knows? Maybe there's a Tao master there who's already cultivated the secret technique of the Divine Eye to the fifth turn." Jian Wushuang teased. Unexpectedly, Na Ilwan became anxious and said, "Although you carry the aura of the Divine Eye clan, you clearly don't understand them. Nor do you understand the secret technique of the Divine Eye. Most of the cultivators you're comparing to are from the human race. They've cultivated one of the first 5 turns, which indeed seems simple. But have you seen how hard it is for them to fuse these techniques? In the entire ancient domain, only the Holy Lord has successfully fused 2 techniques and begun cultivating the third sequence. This triggered the descent of a universe master's legacy within our clan, allowing him to receive the complete inheritance of the first 5 turns. But have you noticed, all these years, that Holy Lord still hasn't completed the third turn? That makes sense. The first turn is the easiest. Or, to put it differently, any one of the first 5 turns is simple when taken individually, but combining them increases the difficulty exponentially." Jian Wushuang nodded in agreement. After all, he couldn't compare himself to others. What he spoke of was purely theoretical, as he hadn't cultivated the technique himself. But he still needed to give it a try. He couldn't solely rely on capturing Divine Eye clan cultivators to open the 9-prison pagoda. They were too hard to find. As for capturing powerful individuals who had mastered the secret technique of the Divine Eye, his own limited strength made that difficult as well. He might as well attempt to cultivate the 4th turn of the secret technique of the Divine Eye himself. Perhaps by doing so, he could unlock the 4th level of the 9-prison pagoda on his own. Jian Wushuang chatted with Na Ilwan for a long time. Besides some general information, there were 2 key pieces of information that were useful to him. First, there was a potential lead about the Divine Eye clan. This was related to Na Ilwan's injuries. He had heard that within a secret realm of the universe, a sacred land of the Divine Eye clan had appeared. He had also heard that there was life inside. Believing that powerful members of the Divine Eye clan had shown up, he had ventured into that secret realm of the universe. However, before he could enter the sacred land, he was ambushed by a group of mysterious experts on the outskirts. He barely managed to escape with his life. He wasn't sure what had happened afterward, as he fled through thousands of worlds before finally stopping in the ancient domain. The second matter was about the universe flying boat. Back then, he had seized the body of the two-faced Buddha and threw a large amount of his treasures into a dangerous place within the chaos void. That dangerous place was very close to the ancient domain world. If a Tao master hurried, they could reach it within 100 years. However, that dangerous place was renowned across dozens of great worlds in the vicinity. Even emperors who entered it were prone to falling. As for Tao masters, very few dared to venture inside. Therefore, he threw his treasures into the core of that dangerous place, planning to retrieve them once he had stabilized and regained his strength. These 2 pieces of information were indeed very useful to him, but each one was extremely difficult. So, he didn't rush into action immediately but instead asked some questions regarding self-sacrifice. At the moment, he was researching this matter. When Ilwan heard that he was studying divine blood, she felt an urge to mock him but hesitated, unsure if it would be appropriate. However, She couldn't completely hold her tongue. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang raised his hand and signaled, "Go ahead and say what you want." "You're delusional," she sneered. Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang? Who do you think you are? You even dare covet divine blood? Let me tell you, even the simplest silver divine blood comes from universe gods. Though it's been diluted many times over, it's not something that a mere— Wait, what realm are you in now? Ilwan's expression stiffened. Earlier, Jian Wushuang had only referred to himself as one of the chosen, which hadn't deceived her. Therefore, Ilwan had assumed he was just a prodigy of the Divine Eye clan who had inherited some kind of legacy. She had no idea how powerful he had been at his peak. It was no wonder she mocked him so openly. Jian Wushuang, unfazed by the ridicule, calmly replied, "I'm currently in the Mahayana stage, at the third transformation of the mystical art." Rip! Ilwan's eyes widened, and she gasped in disbelief. "You can't possibly be only in the Mahayana stage?" Seeing her doubt, Jian Wushuang directly revealed his true form. A one-eyed realm beast, exuding an aura of destruction and evil. His aura was entirely different from the rules of heaven and earth. Even the rules within his aura were different. However, there was no sign of any origin source. There wasn't even the slightest hint of origin source's aura. As for his strength, it was best left unsaid. Without an origin source, he was just a Mahayana stage cultivator. Ilwan first marveled at how terrifying Jian Wushuang's true form was. Her expression then changed drastically as she exclaimed, "You really are in the Mahayana stage? You don't have an origin source? Then what was the origin source from before?" "Naturally, I was deceiving you, but I do indeed have some connection with the Divine Eye clan." Jian Wushuang raised an eyebrow. He wasn't lying. His relationship with the Divine Eye clan was quite significant. In terms of seniority, it wouldn't be an exaggeration for Ilwan to call him granduncle. Despicable! Ilwan cursed when she realized she'd been fooled, unable to hold back her anger. However, she had already said everything she needed to, and knowing that some of Jian Wushuang's words were true, she wasn't genuinely angry. "Now can you tell me more about the divine blood?" Jian Wushuang asked calmly. "I've already researched quite a bit, and I've discovered that the life level of this silver divine blood is very low, only at the cosmic level. There must be stronger divine blood above it, right?" Ilwan nodded and replied, "That's right. Divine blood is divided into 9 levels. Silver is the second tier with a peak divine power of 10,000 times. A lower tier black divine blood has only 5,000 times divine power. There's also the golden divine blood, used by emperors, which has 50,000 times divine power. However, all these are remnants left by the universe gods, mainly to reward the servants who pledged allegiance to the Divine Eye clan." As she said this, Ilwan proudly raised her head, showcasing the former glory of the Divine Eye clan. "I think I understand." Jian Wushuang nodded. Ilwan was surprised. "What do you understand?" He had just finished speaking when Jian Wushuang's figure suddenly transformed into that of a strong expert from the Divine Eye clan. His aura surged, and he actually transformed into a universe god. However, he wasn't a true universe god, just someone whose life level resembled that of a universe god. But that was enough. Jian Wushuang took out a drop of silver blood and directly dropped it onto his forehead. "You're insane," Na Ilwan exclaimed in shock. "After sacrificing your body, you'll lose all potential for advancement, and your path of cultivation will be destroyed." Yet Jian Wushuang ignored him and proceeded with the sacrifice. His figure immediately transformed into a silver puppet. The life level of a universe god began to amplify. The color of his body instantly turned golden. "Ha! It worked!" Jian Wushuang laughed heartily and said, "Now my life level has reached that of a third-grade golden puppet. I have 5 million units of divine power. Although it's borrowed divine power, it's enough for me to use." Na Ilwan, standing nearby, was dumbfounded when he saw Jian Wushuang using silver divine blood to turn into a golden puppet. The shock Jian Wushuang had given him was too overwhelming to process all at once. Jian Wushuang paid no further attention to Na Ilwan. He compared the 9 kinds of divine blood. At present, he could only use third-grade divine blood to become a golden puppet. A golden puppet possessed 5 million times the divine power. Beyond that, the power was measured by the number of eyes. A 3-eyed golden puppet could wield 10 million times the divine power. Such a being could stand invincible before emperors. His physical body level was naturally no issue, but the universe god form he had evolved could not be further enhanced. To ascend to the 3-eyed puppet stage, he would need a drop of golden divine blood. At that time, he wouldn't even need to grasp the origin source to stand invincible before emperors. Moreover, he still had the leaves from the world tree. Transform! The leaves covered his entire body, instantly morphing into a set of black armor. On his arm, there was also an additional layer of green vine armor. Now, I can look down upon the emperors. Jian Wushuang's heart was filled with confidence. His strength had arrived. The universe flying boat, wandering across all realms, was no longer far away. Soon, he could even explore the cosmic secret realm Na Ilwan had mentioned. His 10,000 years of seclusion had finally yielded its greatest harvest today. Now he could take the first step toward action. After 10,000 years of isolation, he had no idea what had become of the outside world. Na Ilwan, you can stay here and continue cultivating. Others might come in eventually, and I'll need your help in training them. Training? Na Ilwan was confused. How could he have known that Jian Wushuang intended to recruit a group of followers? They would enter this place to cultivate, and through divine blood sacrifice, they would become his subordinates, an important force to suppress the Divine Eye clan. To kill someone was one thing, but to destroy their spirit was another. After this period of seclusion, Jian Wushuang had maximized all possible enhancements. It was time to venture out once again. Before leaving, he visited the cave heaven world on the first level. After 10,000 years of absence, the people there had been anxiously waiting for him. The moment he appeared, everyone surrounded him. The first to approach were Zhou Chun and Xianxia. In these 10,000 years, both of them had become Dao Lords. Truth be told, the treasures Jian Wushuang had given them in the past were abundant. In 10,000 years, it was entirely possible to become emperors, let alone Dao Lords. Brother Wushuang, you're finally back. Do you have any idea how I've spent these 10,000 years? I became a Dao Lord within the first 300 years. And I've been waiting for you to give me a harmony treasure for 9,700 years. Xiangyang wailed. Zhou Chun, on the other hand, remained composed and said calmly, "It's only been 10,000 years. Just a brief nap." Both of their auras were now extraordinary. They had grown far stronger than the subordinates of the twin-faced Buddha from the past. At the same time, the others also envied Zhou Chun and Xiangyang. In just 10,000 years, they had surpassed the twin-faced Buddha's former subordinates. Now, with their divine bodies and divine power reaching 10,000 times, they had achieved the level of cosmic perfection. Moreover, they were on the verge of merging with the Tao. The key point was that neither of them had cultivated the secret art of the divine eye. In their view, without the drag of the divine eye secret art, merging with the Tao would be simple. In fact, this was not the case. Even without cultivating the secret art of the divine eye, if one's grasp of the level of origin Tao was too high, it would still be difficult to succeed in merging with the Tao. Shuiyang had mastered the ultimate origin, while Immortal Zhou Chun had chosen the path of myriad origins. This was essentially the divine power route. However, it was all more or less the same. Merging with the Tao was difficult, but once successful, their combat strength would skyrocket several times over. Seeing the strength of the two had become so formidable, Jian Wushuang was pleased. It wasn't a waste that he had spent so many treasures. All right, here I am, and soon I'll be heading out. By that time, I'll prepare treasures for both of you to help with merging with the Tao. Jian Wushuang reassured the two of them before turning to look at the others. Fairy Ziyu, after 10,000 years, looked even younger, and her strength had also grown. She had already become a 9-step true immortal. After all, the deep-sea pearl had boosted her progress. At this point, Jian Wushuang felt like an old hen going out to find food to feed these people. 10,000 years have passed, Brother Wushuang. How much have you recovered? Have you grasped the origin source of the universe? Or have you already reached the level of a universe god? Shuiyang asked curiously. In his view, Jian Wushuang must have recovered his strength the fastest. He himself had already reached the verge of merging with the Tao. Once successful, he could venture out on his own and become a tribulation-level expert in no time. As for Jian Wushuang, there was no need to mention it, he must have advanced even faster. Immortal Zhou Chun, on the other hand, didn't quite understand what they were talking about regarding strength recovery, but he was well aware of Jian Wushuang's terrifying power, especially the invisible and formless aura that made him feel as though he was staring into the void. Seeing the two of them waiting expectantly, Jian Wushuang felt a bit awkward. He coughed lightly and said in a low voice, "Just a small step forward. Nothing too impressive. Your small step is my giant leap." Shuiyang seemed very satisfied with this answer, as it meant he could now rely on Jian Wushuang's power. Little did he know, Jian Wushuang was already considering relying on both of them for support. Not wanting to dwell on this topic, Jian Wushuang quickly changed the subject. "By the way, I've recently opened up a new world that contains the origin source of the universe. You can go there to cultivate." "The origin source of the universe?" Immortal Zhou Chun exclaimed in shock. Shuiyang, however, gestured with his hand, indicating calmness, and said indifferently, "Keep it low-key. It's no big deal." At this moment, he was even more convinced that Jian Wushuang had already become a universe master. Otherwise, how could he have opened up the origin source of the universe? Jian Wushuang couldn't be bothered to explain further and directly teleported everyone into the third layer of the world, within the origin source of the universe. As soon as they arrived, they were overwhelmed by a suffocating force. That force surged wildly, flooding into their bodies. At first, it was uncomfortable, but after they adjusted, it felt like bathing in cool water on a hot summer day. Their spirits were instantly revitalized, as they luxuriated in the origin source, feeling as though they were favored by the very essence of the universe itself. My heavens! It's truly the origin source of the universe. Cultivating here is 1,000 times faster than in the most elite training grounds of the ancient domain world. Guardian Yunhai exclaimed in awe. Guardian Chiefing, dragging his plump body, swam through the origin source, basking in its vast power. How extraordinary! How truly extraordinary! No auxiliary treasure can compare to this place. If I stay here, I may very well become an emperor. Ziyu Immortal appeared calm on the surface, but deep inside, she was immensely astonished. Origin source of the universe? What kind of existence is Jian Wushuang? For a moment, everyone was lost in their beautiful fantasies. Jian Wushuang glanced at the group, and seeing that the timing was right, he spoke up. "Everyone, I once promised that I would set you free after leaving the ancient sea overturning domain. However, due to some personal matters, I have delayed for 10,000 years. But rest assured, I am now able to leave the ancient sea overturning domain, and you will soon regain your freedom." Freedom? At that moment, the 10 true immortals and the 4 guardians were all stunned. At first, they did indeed want to leave, and deep down, they felt a bit anxious, fearing that Jian Wushuang might go back on his word. After all, 10,000 years had passed, and he had not appeared once, leaving them confined in that celestial cave. Although they could still cultivate in the celestial world, they were frustrated by the lack of opportunities for adventure and growth. However, Zhu Chun and Xianxia had both cultivated from the great perfection stage all the way to the verge of Tao integration, leaving the others in awe. This only made them more eager to leave and venture out to grow stronger. So much so that the moment Jian Wushuang appeared, they had made up their minds. Once he gave the word, they would leave immediately. But after entering the origin source of the universe, they had all changed their minds. They had even forgotten about leaving. Now all they wanted was to stay and cultivate in this place. They thought of nothing else. Even if they had to be Jian Wushuang's dogs, they would still choose to stay. To possess a legendary divine object like the origin source of the universe, Jian Wushuang must be an immensely powerful figure, and they would naturally want to cling to him. Guardian Yunhai, ever the opportunist, was the first to step forward, saying, "Senior Wushuang, what are you talking about? Aren't we all on the same side? Who cares about freedom, or not? Surely everyone here is already free." Exactly, Yunhai is right. We've always followed others wherever we went. Being able to follow Senior Wushuang is an honor. We never even thought about leaving. Guardian Chiefing quickly chimed in. Seeing this, the others rushed to show their loyalty. The four guardians Yunhai, Chiefing, Lanhai, and Yoshang'al knelt on one knee, pledging to follow Jian Wushuang's lead. The 10 true immortals did the same, with Chu Xiong and old ancestor Shui He leading the way. Ziyu Immortal stood to the side, watching these once great figures kneel before Jian Wushuang. She was quite satisfied with her earlier decision. It was clear as day following Jian Wushuang would bring great prospects in the future. What did the ancient domain world have to offer? The Lord of the ancient court? The Lord of the Holy Land? None of them had the origin source of the universe. Jochin glanced at the group and added, Jian Wushuang, these people aren't weak. Over the years, they've sparred with Xianxia and me quite a bit. Why not take them in? They could at least run errands in the future. It's not like this place isn't big enough for a few more people. Xianxia didn't seem to mind. After hearing everyone's persuasion, Jian Wushuang finally gave a reluctant sigh. Well, since everyone is saying this, it would be hard for me to refuse. However, following me will inevitably come with great danger, so make sure you think it through. Of course, danger also brings rewards. As long as you perform well, I will not be stingy. Senior Wushuang, what are you saying? We're more than willing to serve you. Even if we have to face knives and flames, we'll never hesitate. Haha, if that's the case, then we're all on the same side now. For the time being, feel free to cultivate here. If anyone ever feels bored, just let me know, and we can all go out together, Jian Wushuang said with a wave of his hand. Everyone shook their heads in unison. None of them wanted to leave. All they wanted was to stay and cultivate in this place. At this point, Jian Wushuang didn't want to dampen their spirits. Indeed, the cultivation speed here was incredibly fast, but the origin source had its limits. When they eventually hit a bottleneck, no matter how fast the cultivation speed was, they would still need to venture out for experience. When the time came, he would move on to the next step of his plan. The others had already begun their seclusion. Jian Wushuang took Immortal Jiuchan and Shuiyang with him and left the 9-prison pagoda. Within the cave mansion atop the divine mountain. At the moment he opened his eyes, the cave mansion lit up instantly. 2 figures appeared beside him. One was old, the other young. They were Shuiyang and Immortal Jiuchan. Let's go! Jian Wushuang stood up and led the 2 out of the cave mansion. The moment they stepped outside, the first breath they took was filled with the scent of blood. The world before them made all 3 frown. At this moment, the entire Sky Altar City reeked of blood. As far as the eye could see, the number of cultivators in the city had multiplied 100-fold compared to before. Just the presence of Tao Lords could be felt from hundreds of individuals. There were over 100,000 true immortals. Among them, there were even 2 great emperors. 10,000 years. The changes in the outside world are truly shocking. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but marvel internally. As soon as the 3 of them appeared on the mountaintop, a streak of brown light rushed toward them. Sir, you must be Senior Jian Wushuang from Jia 1 Cave Mansion, correct? The brown light stopped in front of Jian Wushuang, revealing a young woman dressed in a yellow Taoist robe. Her power was modest, at most a 7-step true immortal. However, judging by the aura surrounding her, her background seemed far from ordinary. This was because she possessed a supreme treasure within her. The aura Jian Wushuang currently emitted was that of a peak Tao Lord. Immortal Jiuchan and Shuiyang were the same. Both were at the edge of becoming Tao Lords, and such strength was feared across any ancient domain. That's right. Jian Wushuang nodded in acknowledgement. The young woman in yellow smiled faintly and explained, Senior, you've been in seclusion for 10,000 years, so you may not know. The overturning sea ancient domain, along with 7 surrounding ancient domains, has now been conquered by the ancient court. Naturally, the Divine Mountain is also under the jurisdiction of the ancient court. Therefore, your cave mansion requires certain procedures to be officially transferred to us. But don't worry, Senior. The cave mansion will still be your personal property. Your ancient court moves swiftly. To have conquered 7 ancient domains in one go, Jian Wushuang remarked in surprise. This time, his exit from seclusion was not to linger in the ancient domains. He intended to leave. He planned to venture to the dangerous land that Ilwan had mentioned in search of the cosmic flying boat. As for the permanent cave mansion, he no longer had any use for it. He didn't have the time to sell it off either. So with a playful tone he said, Taoist, friend, why don't you tell me what has happened over the past 10,000 years? I probably won't need that cave mansion anymore, so I'll give it to you for now. The young woman in yellow kept her expression steady, though she was somewhat curious and slightly amused inside. Although Jian Wushuang was evidently a powerful Tao Lord, her own background was exceptionally strong. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been tasked with managing the Divine Mountain. Naturally, a Jia-number cave mansion meant little to her. However, she remembered that the overturning sea ancient domain had been quite turbulent lately, and her father was recruiting a group of Tao Lords for an important mission. Her brows relaxed, and she smiled warmly. Senior, there's no need to be so polite. If there's anything you'd like to know, I'll answer truthfully. He's not being polite, and you, little girl, shouldn't refuse. If he's giving you a cave mansion, why not accept it for free? Immortal Jochun teased from the side. The woman in yellow only smiled slightly and raised her hand, saying, Senior, please follow me. Let's have a chat at the Cliff of Reflection. After speaking, she personally led the way to the mountain's peak. The Cliff of Reflection was originally a place where strong cultivators, upon reaching a bottleneck, would come to meditate and gain insight. However, due to the war between the ancient court and the Holy Land, the place was no longer peaceful and had lost its original purpose for reflection. As a result, it had been transformed into a tea house. The woman in yellow led Jian Wushuang and his 2 companions to a pavilion by the cliff's edge. She instructed a maid to bring over a tea set and personally brewed and served the tea for the 3 of them. Allow me to introduce myself, seniors. You may call me Huang Yuer. I come from the Moon Shadow Pavilion of the Ancient Court. My father is Emperor Yu Ying, the master of the pavilion. I am here because my father went to the ancient sea region, and I was tasked with handling some logistics. However, I visited the ancient sea region 10,000 years ago, back when it wasn't under the control of the Divine Mountain, so you haven't seen me before. Huang Yuer's manner was respectful and poised, but her words carried a natural air of pride. Jian Wushuang took a sip of tea, contemplating the information he had about the world of the ancient domain in his mind. Emperor Yu Ying was one of the top 10 Tao Lords in the ancient court. The Moon Shadow Pavilion, which he established, had produced 2 powerful Tao Lords. No wonder this young girl is so calm and collected when dealing with us. She comes from such a prominent background, Jian Wushuang thought to himself. He didn't waste any time on small talk and directly asked about the great battle that took place 10,000 years ago. Huang Yuer, in an orderly manner, recounted the details of that battle from 10,000 years ago. The ultimate battle of that time wasn't actually fought between Jian Wushuang and Yang Dingtian. Instead, it involved a great clash between the Tao Lords. A Tao Lord from the Holy Land descended upon the twin-faced God Mansion to seize a Chaos Supreme treasure. Little did they know, the ancient court had laid an ambush of 6 powerful Tao Lords within the mansion. Each of these Tao Lords was a top-tier, 3rd-stage powerhouse. Among them was Huang Yuer's father. The Tao Lord from the Holy Land was caught off guard by the ambush, severely injured in an instant, and tried to escape, only to realize that an ancient formation was hidden within the twin-faced God Mansion. The 6 Tao Lords of the ancient court activated the formation, instantly suppressing the Tao Lord from the Holy Land. The Holy Land, which already had few Tao Lords, suffered a massive blow in strength in an instant. The ancient court, however, continued to observe the situation, looking for an opportunity to test the strength of the Holy Lord. Then, They received word from an unknown source that the Holy Lord was trapped in a perilous location and wouldn't be able to emerge for some time. Upon hearing this, the ancient court immediately mobilized its army, crushing 17 ancient domains in one fell swoop. They successfully took 7 of these domains. The remaining 10 were still resisting. Among those resisting was the ancient sea domain. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang furrowed his brows slightly and asked in surprise, "You mean there are still forces resisting in the ancient sea domain?" "That's right." Huang Yuer smiled faintly and said, "Senior, you should also know that the ancient sea domain was once home to 2 major powers. After the twin-faced Buddha was killed by Yang Dingtian, only Yang Dingtian remained. When 6 Tao lords of the ancient court descended upon the ancient sea domain, they wiped out many powerful cultivators. However, they did not target Yang Dingtian, hoping instead to persuade him to join the ancient court. But who would have thought that Yang Dingtian would refuse to comply and even attack the Tao lords? In the end, he was severely wounded and fled from the ancient sea domain. Over the past 1,000 years, he has returned with people to the ancient sea domain, still plotting to destroy the formation within the twin-faced God Mansion and release the suppressed Tao Lord. This is why the ancient sea domain remains unrestful. Jian Wushuang was quite shocked. Yang Dingtian was not a cultivator who followed the path of divine eye techniques. Why would he resist? It didn't make sense to him. Yang Dingtian had no reason not to surrender. Or rather, it wouldn't even be considered surrender. After killing the twin-faced Buddha and offending the Holy Land, Yang Dingtian wouldn't need anyone from the ancient court to persuade him. He would have naturally joined their side. Why would he still resist and even dare to attack Tao lords? Wasn't that courting death? He looked at Huang Yuer without showing any surprise on his face, though a different guess had already formed in his mind. "By the way, you mentioned the appearance of a Chaos Supreme treasure. Who ended up obtaining it?" Jian Wushuang asked curiously. Huang Yuer's face darkened as she replied indignantly, "It was taken by that scoundrel Yang Dingtian. He ambushed the Tao Lord and stole the Chaos Supreme treasure. Otherwise, it would have been my father's." "Is that so?" Jian Wushuang let out a cold laugh in his heart. That Chaos Supreme treasure had indeed fallen into the hands of Yang Dingtian. There must be some deep enmity between them. It was highly likely that the Tao Lord of the ancient court had ambushed Yang Dingtian in an attempt to seize the treasure, but Yang Dingtian had managed to escape. However, his followers were not as fortunate. To escape from a Tao Lord, one would at least need to be at the level of an extreme Taoist. Other than Yang Dingtian, no one in the ancient sea region possessed such strength. As for the current trouble in the ancient sea region, it was most likely an act of revenge. Based on what the other party had said, Yang Dingtian should have absorbed the power of the Golden Sun fruit, stabilizing his position as a heaven-defying Taoist with divine power of 10,000-fold. He was now powerful enough to contend with a Tier 3 Tao Lord. Could be said that, below the Tao Lord level, he was virtually invincible. The war from 10,000 years ago had started with Yang Dingtian and the two-faced Buddha. The events that followed were quite clear. 1 Holy Master from the Holy Land and 3 Tao Lords. The Holy Master was trapped, and although the 3 Tao Lords together could stand against the ancient court, one of them was suppressed, leaving the remaining 2 unable to guard all 36 regions of the ancient realm. 7 regions were lost, and 10 were frequently contested, with no stability. This was already the limit for the Holy Land. If not for the extraordinary strength of the 2 remaining Tao Lords, the Holy Land might have been overrun by now. Jian Wushuang was merely curious about all this. His current goal was to find Jiang and I and see how she was doing. She had solidified her Tao heart 10,000 years ago, so by now she should have become a Taoist. With that thought, Jian Wushuang asked, "By the way, in the past 10,000 years, has there been a female sword immortal who has risen to prominence? Her strength should be around the level of a true immortal or a Taoist." "A female sword immortal?" Huang Yuer's eyes widened in surprise upon hearing the question. Seeing her shock, Jian Wushuang quickly explained, "Before I went into seclusion, I was already searching for her. Her mother had a grudge against me, and I failed to eliminate her entirely back then. The reason I emerged this time is because of this matter." Hearing this explanation, Huang Yue breathed a sigh of relief. The person you speak of, Senior, I'm not certain, but there may be someone like that. Over the past 10,000 years, 7 female sword immortals have risen. 4 of them were cultivators below the level of a 7-step true immortal with decent talent but not powerful enough to be considered strong. As for the other 3, 2 of them are 9-step true immortals, both disciples of the Sword Pavilion within the ancient court with clean backgrounds, so they can't possibly be your enemies. Only one matches the description you've given. Her identity is unknown, and no one even knows her name. People outside refer to her as the quasi-immortal emperor. She has the bearing of a Taoist capable of battling Tao lords, even stronger than Yang Dingtian. As Huang Yucker spoke, her eyes were filled with jealousy and resentment. The jealousy stemmed from the fact that several of the senior disciples she admired were deeply infatuated with this woman. The resentment came from the fact that this quasi-immortal sovereign had always been at odds with the ancient court and had even attacked her father once. Recently, Yang Dingtian had even teamed up with Shui Yang to make a move against the formation within the Shuangmian God Palace. Upon hearing her description, Jian Wushuang's heart stirred, and he was certain it was Jiang and I herself. Quasi-immortal emperor? Jian Wushuang's lips curled into a faint smile. It seems that back then, I left behind a hidden danger. I didn't expect that even after closing myself off for 10,000 years. I still couldn't eliminate it completely. Xianxia interrupted mindlessly. You're not talking about little Jiang and I, are you? Ahem. Jian Wushuang coughed lightly and glared. Why are you calling her so affectionately? Is she your wife? Wasn't she just a kid back then? Xianxia felt a little wronged. He didn't understand what Jian Wushuang was up to. Why not just go and find Jiang and I directly instead of wasting time gossiping with this little girl? Jian Wushuang, however, acted as though he was heartbroken. It was unclear if he was pretending or genuinely distressed. Seeing this, Huang Yue felt a spark of joy in her heart and hurriedly extended an olive branch. Senior, all is not lost. That quasi-immortal emperor is currently in the ancient territory of Overturning Sea, and our ancient court is gathering strong cultivators to capture her in one swoop. If Senior seeks revenge, why not join our ancient court's forces and participate in the siege? Huang Yue suggested excitedly. Jian Wushuang, however, appeared troubled. His eyes showed a trace of fear as he politely declined. Friend, you've said it yourself. She is a quasi-immortal emperor, capable of battling a Tao lord. If a small figure like me goes, I'm afraid I'll be cut down by her in one strike. Senior, you need not worry. She was recently ambushed by my father and 2 other Tao lords, and she's already injured. Moreover, my father has a method to locate her hiding place. Right now, they are gathering forces to launch the assault, and Yang Dingtian and his group are with her. Huang Yue said with enthusiasm. She was thrilled because not only could she effortlessly recruit 3 Tao lords, but she didn't even have to promise them any benefits. Once her father and senior brother found out, they would surely reward her. However, seeing the fear in Jian Wushuang's eyes, she secretly sneered, thinking that Jian Wushuang's earlier arrogant demeanor was all just an act. The moment he heard of the quasi-immortal emperor, he instantly became too scared to speak. After some hesitation, Jian Wushuang finally said, All right, then I'll trouble you to guide me. However, I must clarify in advance, though I've just emerged from seclusion, I'm still injured and cannot take the lead in the battle. I hope you'll understand. No problem. At this point, Huang Yue had lost all respect. She felt that she had seen through Jian Wushuang, seeing his fear of death as a Tao lord. She even mocked him in her heart several times. After arranging Jian Wushuang and his 2 companions at the top of the divine mountain in the temple, Huang Yue left for the temple where her father resided, ready to report this matter to him. Just as she approached her father's temple, a furious roar echoed from within. A bunch of useless fools, utterly useless. I asked you to find a few Tao lords and you couldn't even do that. Do you expect me to beg the ancient court for reinforcements? The subordinates inside all wore miserable expressions, not daring to refute. There was nothing they could do. The ancient court's battlefront was stretched very thin. Of the 17 ancient territories, 7 had been completely secured, with only 1 ordinary Dao Lord needed to maintain order. 3 to 5 Dao Lords would suffice as support. Most of the forces stationed there were local powerhouses, and even they had been recruited into the ancient court. A majority of the elite forces had been deployed to the 2 ancient territories at the forefront of the war, where the true slaughterhouses were located. The ancient territory of Overturning Sea, being at the rear, was theoretically the safest place. But this territory also contained the sealed Dao Lord of the Sacred Land, requiring Emperor Yuing, a third-tier Dao Lord, to remain stationed here. Things had been fine for the past few millennia, but recently 2 troublesome individuals had appeared. Though neither were Dao Lords, they were more challenging to deal with than Dao Lords. It was driving him to the brink. In Tiantan City, the 2 Dao Lords had split their responsibilities. One guarded the sealing formation of the Dao Lord, while the other defended Tiantan City. Emperor Yuing was tasked with eliminating the sacred land cultivators who were causing trouble. The 3 Dao Lords worked in tandem. The other 2 had relatively easier tasks, but Yu Ying's was the most difficult. The ancient territory of Overturning Sea was vast. If the formation sealing the Dao Lord were to be destroyed, the ancient court's efforts might all be in vain. Thus, the situation had to be stabilized, and the sacred land's cultivators eradicated. Certainly. Here's the English translation of the passage using past tense narration with the standardized terms you've provided. But right now, there simply weren't enough people. He could only recruit more himself. Many of his Dao Lords had died in battle. Now only 6 remained. Some of the Dao Lords were stationed at the ancient court or even further on the front lines. They were guarding key fortresses and couldn't be deployed. The only remaining option was to mobilize the Dao Lords from the ancient court. But what reason could he use to justify their deployment? To annihilate a Dao Lord? He, a Dao Lord himself, couldn't handle it? This was an utter humiliation. To destroy a Dao Lord, he, a Dao Lord, couldn't accomplish it and still needed reinforcements. How would the ancient court see him after this? He, Emperor Yuing, was ranked among the top 10 in the ancient court. In fact, if he could obtain a Chaos Supreme treasure, he could even rank in the top 5. Currently, the ancient court was under the rule of the 3rd-generation lord of the ancient court, Emperor Gentian. The difference in strength between him and Emperor Gentian wasn't too large, so he also harbored ambitions of becoming the lord of the ancient court. So, 10,000 years ago, he had proactively gone to the palace of the twin-faced god. As a result, not only did he fail to obtain the Chaos Supreme treasure, but he was even wounded by a mere Dao Lord. Thus, he remained stationed at the Overturning Sea ancient domain. First, everything was going well. He was planning to expand his territory. After all, the lands he conquered needed someone to guard them. He was stationed at the central hub of the front lines, the Overturning Sea ancient domain, and was poised to become the #1 figure leading the assault on the sacred land. But due to the appearance of Yang Dingtian and that quasi-immortal emperor, he was forcibly trapped in the Overturning Sea ancient domain, assigned a position to eradicate internal strife. The title of the primary leader for the Sacred Land campaign had gone to Lord Long, a Dao Lord who had achieved his position during the ancient demon era. He was not pleased. After all, the opponent had been alive for hundreds of thousands of years, yet his strength hadn't improved at all. Like him, Lord Long was also a peak 3rd-tier Dao Lord. But there was one thing that set him apart: he was still young and had the potential to become a 4th-tier Dao Lord in the future. In the entire ancient court, there were only 2 4th-tier Dao Lords. The first was the Lord of Yuanzheng. The other was the Immortal Emperor of 3 talents. The strength of these 2 was on par with the Dao Lord they had subdued. They were all 4th-tier Dao Lords. Back then, the Sacred Land boasted that even without their sacred lord, their 3 Dao Lords could stand against all the Dao Lords of the ancient court. It wasn't just idle talk, they truly could achieve it. Only the strength of the sacred lord surpassed them by a margin. No one could shake him, but now that the sacred lord was gone, people began to have other ideas. To win the battle for orthodoxy, this was the belief of everyone in the ancient court. But now, before the great task was even completed, He had been driven to the brink by two Tao lords. Emperor Yu Ying sat in the main seat, looking extremely fatigued. At this moment, seeing his daughter walk in, he forced a faint smile and gently said, "Yuer, what brings you here?" "Father." Huang Yuer glanced at her several senior brothers and quickly said, "I heard father is recruiting Tao lords. I happen to have a few candidates in mind." Upon hearing these words, several disciples of Emperor Yu Ying lifted their heads to look at their junior sister. Although she was rather plain-looking and had a peculiar personality, at this moment, she seemed like their savior. "Oh," Emperor Yu Ying was surprised. "You have someone in mind?" "Yes, father appointed me to manage the Divine Mountain, and just now, 3 Tao lords emerged from their secluded cultivation within the mountain. They are all powerful figures who went into seclusion 10,000 years ago and have only just come out," Huang Yuer answered truthfully. However, Emperor Yu Ying appeared somewhat cautious and asked, "Can these people be trusted?" Even though he was eager to recruit people, he wasn't going to accept just anyone. If these individuals had ties to the Holy Land, it would be akin to laying a trap for himself. Huang Yuer was confident as she replied, "There's no problem with them. All 3 have deep grudges against a certain quasi-immortal emperor, and their hatred runs as deep as a sea of blood." She then recounted Jian Wushuang's earlier words without changing a single detail. After listening, Emperor Yu Ying's face lit up with joy. He praised her, saying, "Yuer, this time you've done an excellent job, far better than your useless senior brothers. Quickly invite those 3 Tao lords here. If we can make use of them, you will have made a great contribution, and you'll no longer need to watch over the Divine Mountain. You can start working in the City Lord's mansion." "Thank you, father," Huang Yuer exclaimed excitedly. She promptly left the temple and headed to the place where Jian Wushuang and his companions were staying. Jian Wushuang and the others had barely settled down when they heard Huang Yuer's voice. "Senior Wushuang, my father has invited you all over." Huang Yuer's voice was filled with excitement. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang immediately stood up and asked, "Emperor Yu Ying wants to see us?" "Yes." Huang Yuer nodded. "My father is waiting in the temple. Let's hurry." She led Jian Wushuang and the others back to the temple. Upon entering the temple, Emperor Yu Ying sat with an imposing air, scrutinizing Jian Wushuang and his group. Naturally, there was nothing suspicious about Jian Wushuang and his companions. Although the 3 of them had all cultivated the secret art of the divine eye, it was only before Emperor Yu Ying had entered seclusion that he had passed on the complete version of this secret art to 2 of them. In 10,000 years, they had managed to cultivate it to the 2nd stage, though it had not yet reached perfection. The first stage was the easiest, often completed within a few decades, but the 2nd stage required 10,000 times more effort. This wasn't much related to talent or insight. Only Immortal Jiuchen, who had some prior understanding of the technique, had progressed relatively quickly in his cultivation. On the other hand, Xianxia had struggled, as it was his first time encountering such a secret art. His cultivation was arduous. Fortunately, they had all reached the 2nd stage, and when fully activated, their strength wasn't inferior to the famed Jiang and I. Of course, no one would reveal their true strength. Just like now, the power they showed was only at the peak Tao Lord level. After a brief inquiry about their identities, Jian Wushuang answered with the pre-prepared story of being void wanderers. The name itself was simple. It referred to cultivators who practiced in the void, seldom appearing in the ancient world. Naturally, few people knew of them. It was the safest method. This also avoided any slip-ups when questioned further. Aside from their backgrounds, Emperor Yu Ying was most concerned with their enmity toward Jiang and I. "Your Majesty, I crossed paths with her mother in the void. Back then, we competed for treasures in a perilous area, and I had no choice but to kill her mother's elder brother. Later, a close friend of mine killed her mother, leaving only her alive. Unable to find her, I went into seclusion, but upon emerging, I discovered she had become a quasi-immortal emperor," Jian Wushuang said, his face showing a complex, indescribable expression. Xiangyang and Immortal Jiuchen were both confused, thinking that Jian Wushuang was being excessively cautious. Even his fabricated story was crafted with such finesse. After all, he was dealing with just a Dao Lord. There was no need for such elaborate deception. Wouldn't it be easier to simply confront Zhang and I? Why go through so much trouble? The only possible explanation was that he was still testing Zhang and I. And indeed, this was exactly Jian Wushuang's plan. Among them, Zhang and I was the only one with enough talent to potentially become a supreme being in the future. With the right nurturing, she could one day reach the pinnacle. Her divine power multiplied 10,000 times, enough to help him contend with the powerful Divine Eye clan experts who had cultivated the secret art of the Divine Eye to its 4th stage. Emperor Yu Ying listened to his explanation. Though he found it incredible, he believed it without question. He immediately expressed that this time, he would help them eliminate their enemies once and for all. As for any treasures, there were no promises made. Like father, like daughter, they both knew how to calculate their moves. They knew Jian Wushuang and his companions were seeking revenge, so their relationship was purely one of cooperation. A date was set. They would depart in a month to hunt down Yang Dingtian and Zhang and I. Jian Wushuang agreed without hesitation. He then left the Qishan temple with Immortal Zhouchun and Shuiyang. The 3 of them didn't stay on the sacred mountain. Instead, they went to an inn within Tiantan City. The city was filled with all kinds of people, making it the best place to gather information about Zhang and I. The rumors they heard were largely consistent with what Huang Yuer had told them. The only difference was that Huang Yuer was more aligned with the ancient court. Most of the cultivators in the inn, however, were more objective. From their tone, Jian Wushuang could tell that Zhang and I had a good reputation. She wasn't known for slaughtering the innocent, she only fought against the strong ones from the ancient court. Jian Wushuang was curious. Why was Zhang and I opposing the ancient court? He had originally thought that she would have joined one of the factions, but after asking around, it seemed that Zhang and I had not aligned herself with any side. She had only partnered with Yang Dingtian too. Could it be that, during the past 10,000 years, she found a lover, and was then killed by the ancient court? Jian Wushuang speculated in his heart. Of course, the reason they entered Tiantan City wasn't just to inquire about Zhang and I. They were also looking for treasures related to the path of unity. Right now, they lacked nothing but such treasures. From Huang Yuer, they learned that there would be an auction in Tiantan City soon. It was to be hosted by an emperor from the ancient court. This emperor was bringing with him a large number of treasures. Originally, this kind of auction would only take place within the ancient court's 36 original ancient domains. But due to the intensity of the frontline battles, many Dao lords, having faced life and death situations, were in desperate need of treasures to replenish themselves. Jian Wushuang still had some miscellaneous treasures on him. He had enough capital to help Immortal Zhouchun and Shuiyang look for something suitable. Thus, he took them to an inn in Tiantan City, where they would wait for the auction to begin. A few days later, Huang Yuer personally came to escort them to the largest auction hosted by the ancient court. The venue was set within the city lord's mansion. Because of the auction, thousands of Dao lords had gathered in Tiantan City over the past few days. All were here for the auction. I've heard that there will be quite a few treasures to assist in the path of unity, including one item that demonstrates the process of unification, Huang Yuer said as they walked. Before long, they arrived at the city lord's mansion. Outside, people were coming and going. They were all Dao lords. That was the minimum requirement to attend. Even a true immortal couldn't afford to bid here. But Huang Yuer was an exception. This time, the auction was being hosted by her senior brother. He was also a disciple of Emperor Yu Ying. The host was the Treasure Emperor. His strength was mediocre, just a second-tier emperor, but he possessed a vast array of treasures. This wasn't something he obtained by risking his life. Instead, it was earned by profiting from auctioning off items. Some of the items were also purchased at low prices. His wealth was no less than that of a peak third-stage emperor. This guy must have a heart of 7 apertures. Jian Wushuang silently admired him. He then followed Huang Yuer into the city lord's mansion. The mansion was enormous. However, the original city lord was no longer there. The current city lord was an emperor. But that emperor did not appear. Everything was arranged by the duo Bao emperor. Huang Yuer led them into a small courtyard, which connected to a pocket dimension. Upon entering the courtyard, they stepped into a small world. The world was tiny. Its layout resembled that of a coliseum. Rows of massive thrones surrounded the stage in the center. At that moment, thousands of Dao lords had already gathered. Huang Yuer led the three of them forward. She spoke a few words to a cold-faced Dao lord, who suddenly broke into a smile and waved at Jian Wushuang and the others, saying, "You three, come to the front row. There are still a few seats left." "Thank you," Jian Wushuang politely replied and proceeded with Zhou Chun and Xianxia. After Huang Yuer finished speaking with the cold-faced Dao lord, she followed them. Xianxia couldn't help but sigh. Connections really make a difference. I just saw a few Dao lords without even a seat. Ha ha ha. Short-sighted, Zhou Chun retorted with a snarky comment. Jian Wushuang remained silent, instead using his thought power to investigate the surroundings. Only then did he realize that the duo Bao emperor had yet to arrive. He didn't want to waste any time. Once the emperor showed up, he would immediately examine the treasures in his possession. At that point, he would know everything about the treasures with just a glance, whether they were of use or not. If none were suitable, he would take Zhou Chun and Xiangyang and leave. The venue was chaotic. You could hear all sorts of talk about the frontline battles. There are still quite a few sacred land cultivators in the ancient domain of Red Leaf. These guys are really persistent, resisting for thousands of years and still not being completely wiped out. Humph. You don't know what it's like near the sacred land, in the mortal dust ancient domain. Now, that place is a real hellhole. Many sacred land cultivators went there for reinforcement. If it weren't for the emperors holding the line, the mortal dust ancient domain would have fallen again by now. The crowd chatted idly, expressing their sighs. Back then, they had boldly claimed they would conquer the entire ancient domain under the sacred land's control. But now they were struggling after conquering only half, and it was starting to feel overwhelming. Even though they had a slight advantage in top-tier strength in terms of mid-level power, the ancient court's individual combat power was far inferior to that of the sacred land. In the sacred land, peak Dao lords were as common as clouds, with one sacred land Dao lord able to take on 10 ancient court Dao lords. How could they possibly hold out? If it weren't for the emperors leading the charge, they wouldn't be able to fight back. In fact, by now, many people understood that this wasn't a life-and-death battle between the two sides, but rather a mutual integration. The sacred land had its advantages, and so did the ancient court. The sacred land's strength lay in its complete God's Eye inheritance, allowing cultivators to train from the first transformation and quickly move to the second. Thus, most of the sacred land's Dao lords were at the peak because of this complete inheritance. However, it was also very difficult for them to merge their Dao, which was why there were few emperors. As for the ancient court, they mainly focused on mastering the origin source at the true immortal stage and then worked on merging their Dao after becoming Dao lords. What happened after becoming an emperor was unclear to them. But from the battles involving the emperors, it became evident that even the emperors were cultivating the God's Eye technique. Jian Wushuang, seated below, listened silently to the discussion around him and nodded slightly in agreement. The group talked about the cultivation paths, starting from the first sequence, which was the first transformation. The appearance of the Holy Land had long been known to the emperors. Only by cultivating from the first transformation could one hope to proceed to the second transformation. Once the second transformation was perfected, they could rival the Holy Lord. The strength of the Holy Lord was so formidable because he was already cultivating the third transformation. If he succeeded in completing the third transformation, he would be an unparalleled powerhouse. That Ilwan was at this very level. At this moment, the Holy Lord was absent, making it the ideal opportunity. Jian Wushuang even suspected that the Holy Lord was intentionally avoiding the scene, allowing the ancient court to merge with the 36 ancient domains of the Holy Land. Only through this fusion would the world of the ancient domains become stronger. If his guess was correct, it would only show that the Holy Lord's ambitions far exceeded those of the emperors. Of course, this was only speculation, and Jian Wushuang couldn't guarantee that the Holy Lord's ambitions were truly this vast, letting his carefully cultivated power be seized by the ancient court. Those who valued their doctrines would never be indifferent to their power being taken. Perhaps the Holy Lord had other plans. Jian Wushuang pondered in his heart. At that moment, a figure bathed in a radiant light descended from the sky. The entire venue immediately fell silent. The figure within the radiance was a middle-aged man with a smile that made others feel as if they were basking in the warmth of spring. Everyone who saw him instinctively felt a sense of trust. This man was none other than Emperor Duobao. He landed steadily on the high platform and raised his hand in greeting, saying, "Welcome, fellow Taoists, to the Duobao auction house." At this, all the Tao lords present rose in unison. "Greetings, Emperor Duobao." They all responded in orderly fashion. After some formalities, the atmosphere on the floor became lively again. The auction begins now. As usual, there are 3 stages. The base price for the first stage treasure starts at 1 billion immortal crystals, Emperor Duobao announced, and with a wave of his hand, he presented a long array of treasures, each marked with a number. The first item, an ancient scroll, contains the insights of a primordial demon on the physical body. "The starting price is 1 billion immortal crystals," he shouted loudly. This was more of an appetizer. The ancient scroll was not considered a particularly valuable treasure, but it could be purchased to help cultivate younger generations in a family, making it a worthwhile acquisition. Soon, many Tao lords who came from families began bidding. Jian Wushuang, however, had no interest in it. He used his thought power to inspect the treasures on Emperor Duobao's body. "This guy actually has an innate supreme treasure." Jian Wushuang was shocked. Not only that, but the man's strength was vastly underestimated by the outside world. He was far from an ordinary second-tier emperor. In fact, he was a bona fide fourth-tier emperor, and he possessed an innate supreme treasure. It wasn't just a chaotic supreme treasure. It was an innate treasure from the ancient domain world. Wasn't it said that all the innate treasures were in the hands of the Holy Lord? Looks like this guy has some connection to the Holy Lord, Jian Wushuang thought to himself. Indeed, the Holy Lord was far more complicated than he had imagined. His hidden hands had even reached the level of the emperor's. It seemed everything in the outside world was just a facade. There was no way the ancient court had just one backup plan. Faced with this internal power struggle, Jian Wushuang could only admire them. He had no other thoughts. He continued to examine the treasures on Emperor Duobao's body. Among the treasures available for auction, there were 27 types of treasures used for merging paths. Immortal Jiuqin followed the myriad Dao stream, while Shuiyang pursued the ultimate path. One required a large number of treasures of any type. The other focused on a single type. Of these 27 types of treasures, he needed to secure at least 80%. Among the 80% of treasures, only 30% would be useful for Shuiyang, while the remaining 50% were meant for Immortal Jiuqin. Once they secured these treasures, their chances of successfully merging paths would increase significantly. If the 2 of them became emperors, their initial strength would be that of a 4th-stage emperor. With further cultivation, reaching the absolute peak wouldn't be an issue. They would definitely become a great asset. Jian Wushuang felt it was worth spending money to nurture them. The issue was he didn't have much money on him right now. He had about 200 billion immortal crystals, which was far from enough. So he had to sell some treasures. For example, the deep-sea relic pearl, which was a heaven-defying treasure for Tao lords, and its price would definitely exceed 500 billion. He also had a few sets of peak supreme treasures. They could be sold for quite a bit, but it still wouldn't be enough. Because half of the path-merging treasures were in the second phase, where the starting bid was 10 billion immortal crystals, and the final price was hard to predict. It could easily exceed 100 billion. Jian Wushuang's mind raced. He had many valuable treasures, but most were not for sale. For instance, the mini-universes inside the gray jar and the world tree leaves. If he tried to sell these, even the universe gods would fight over them. The key was they couldn't be sold in this world, and even if they could, he wouldn't sell them. The world tree leaves were currently his major source of power enhancement. as they could be used for both defense and attack. Moreover, they were a life form that could be cultivated. They would have immense use in the future. Looks like I'll have to fleece someone, Jian Wushuang sighed. But this had always been part of the plan. Sooner or later, he had to deal with Guardian Yunhai and the others, so the timing didn't matter. Without delay, he took out a mustard seed and handed it to Immortal Zhou Chun. Buy all the path-merging treasures. If the money is insufficient, sell the treasures inside. I'll send my thought power to the 9-prison pagoda. You two stay here and keep watch. Jian Wushuang transmitted his voice. When Immortal Zhou Chun and Shui Yang saw that he had begun selling treasures, their expressions turned slightly awkward. Before they could speak, Jian Wushuang had already closed his eyes. Inside the 9-prison pagoda on the 3rd layer of the world, at the core of the origin source. At some point, a large area of temples had already been established here. Each temple had its own title inscribed above it. For instance, Guardian Yunhai had placed a plaque that read, Yunhai Temple. Jian Wushuang found this amusing. It seemed these people had truly made this place their home, claiming the area in advance to avoid it being seized by others later. Aside from their temples, there was also a grand pavilion here. The Sword Pavilion. There was no need to ask, it had been prepared for Jian Wushuang. Without any reservations, he entered the Sword Pavilion and transmitted his voice to the 4 great guardians, and also to Chu Xiong, who was nearly invincible among true immortals. Summoning the 5 of them wasn't for any other reason than treasures. These 5 definitely had considerable wealth. The net worth of a typical true immortal wasn't high. With their personal treasures included, 3 billion was considered impressive. But Chu Xiong was different. He had several rare treasures on him, which Jian Wushuang had sensed earlier, each valued at billions. The net worth of the 4 guardians, when combined, exceeded billions. All of it had to be put to use. There were also 3 silver puppets and a god-destroying war weapon. These things would prove useful in the future. If he took them out, people would recognize them, and it would be difficult to explain. So, he could only reach into the pockets of others. As he summoned 5 people to come over, he took out the 3 silver puppets. At this moment, the divine power of the 3 puppets was 1,000-fold. They possessed the combat strength of an emperor. When the 5 arrived, Jian Wushuang unintentionally glanced at the silver puppets. Guardian Yunhai and the others were curious as to why Jian Wushuang sought them out only a few days after leaving. At that moment, they all worried whether Jian Wushuang intended to dismiss them, and each was eager to prove their loyalty. After all, cultivating here for just a few days was faster than 100 years of training in the outside world. There was certainly hope of becoming an emperor. The emperor's position was their long-coveted dream. Looking at the 5 people with their own thoughts, Jian Wushuang spoke. Everyone, how has your cultivation been recently? Have you touched upon the opportunity to merge with the Tao? Hearing Jian Wushuang ask about their training, Guardian Yunhai immediately responded. Reporting to the Lord, this subordinate has made great strides these days, and there is hope for becoming a great emperor. Cultivating here is like bathing in the spring breeze. I often comprehend the profound workings of the universe. Regarding the emperor's throne, I have a deep understanding. I believe, given time, I will be able to assist the Lord in commanding the entire ancient domain world. Traveling the myriad worlds will no longer be a dream. Guardian Yunhai's skill in flattery was truly top-notch. No wonder the two-faced Buddha had arranged for him to be by Jian Wushuang's side, even sending his own sister to Yunhai as well. Seeing this, the others quickly chimed in. Same with me. Jian Wushuang, however, couldn't help but sigh. Too slow. I'm afraid I can't wait for all of you to ascend to the position of great emperor. He first shook his head with a sigh and then pointed forward, causing the 3 silver puppets to float over. The 3 puppets erupted with divine power simultaneously. A powerful force swept across the room. It was so strong that Guardian Yunhai and the others couldn't lift their heads. Feeling that immense power, the 5 couldn't help but marvel. 10,000-fold divine power. This silver puppet is comparable to Yang Dingtian at his peak. Maybe even stronger. With such puppets in the Lord's hands, our usefulness may be greatly diminished, Guardian Yunhai thought to himself. Seeing that the others were starting to waver, Jian Wushuang continued. It's not that I look down on you, but these silver puppets were transformed by the Sky Eye clan's legendary technique. Do you know what they were before? Everyone remained silent, clearly unaware. After all, when it came to the Sky Eye clan, they only knew about the Sky Eye secret techniques and nothing more. They were once Dao masters. Jian Wushuang didn't beat around the bush and revealed the truth directly. When they heard that the silver puppets were once Dao masters, a trace of astonishment flashed through everyone's eyes. It was akin to a ritual, sacrificing oneself to become a puppet. But they all knew the consequences. Once they became puppets, there was no hope of advancement. Now that Jian Wushuang was telling them this, could it be that he wanted them to sacrifice themselves to become puppets? They were all murmuring in their hearts. If they turned into puppets, what would be the point of cultivating here? Hadn't they clung to Jian Wushuang all this time just to cultivate here? Without the purpose of training, there would be no reason to follow Jian Wushuang anymore. 10,000-fold divine power, transcendent Dao masters. They were indeed powerful, far stronger than they were now. But they wouldn't abandon their path of cultivation for this. Jian Wushuang observed them, fully aware of what they were thinking. He wasn't about to force them to sacrifice themselves. It would defeat the purpose. He needed them to willingly depend on him. He could have sought others from the outside world, but he wasn't confident they would be loyal. These subordinates of the two-faced Buddha had nowhere to go, no background. They knew each other well, making them the easiest to control. That's why he chose these people. Gaining control over a force wasn't just about strength. More importantly, it was about the method. Jian Wushuang rubbed his chin as he watched them, one by one, tense up as if they were struggling with some internal conflict. Especially Guardian Yunhai, his talent was mediocre. At this moment, he was debating whether to play dumb or to directly agree with Jian Wushuang. If he played dumb, he couldn't be sure whether Jian Wushuang would make a move against them. If he agreed with Jian Wushuang, he was certain that Jian Wushuang would help him undergo the sacrifice, allowing him to soar and become a heaven-defying Dao master. In the entire ancient domain world, he would even be able to contend with an emperor. But he was still hesitating, because the stakes were too high. Who would willingly cut off their own future? At this moment, Jian Wushuang spoke. The reason I called you all here today is to find an ordinary true immortal. Someone who has no hope of progressing further but wants to quickly improve their strength. I can help him undergo the sacrifice successfully, and he will follow me from now on and assist me with tasks. Upon hearing this, everyone let out a sigh of relief. It seems that the Lord doesn't want to force us. This is good. In that case, we should recommend someone. They all thought about it in their hearts. At the same time, they discussed it among themselves. Lord, I happen to have someone in mind. Guardian Yunhai was once again the first to speak. Jian Wushuang said indifferently, Go on. Shui He. Guardian Yunhai responded, Lord, you know him as well. This guy has no hope of further advancement. Even if he were to reach the Dao Master level, it would be mediocre at best. At most, he would become a top-tier Dao Master, which wouldn't be much help to you. It's better to let him undergo the sacrifice and become a silver puppet. That would also be a reward for him. The previously silent Chu Xiong also chimed in. Shui He is indeed a good choice. His disposition is solid, and his strength is not weak. He is more than capable of fulfilling the role. Very well, let him come here. Jian Wushuang waved his hand. The group was overjoyed and quickly sent a message to Shui He. This guy had no idea that while he was quietly cultivating, his future had already been decided by the others. When he arrived, he was completely bewildered. It was Chu Xiong who explained everything to him. Upon hearing about this opportunity, Shui He immediately agreed. He knew exactly how much potential he had. The chance to effortlessly become a heaven-defying Dao Master was nothing short of a dream come true. Without hesitation, he knelt before Jian Wushuang and swore his lifelong allegiance to him. Jian Wushuang was not surprised. He pressed his hand down and said, I'll help you become a Tao master first. Now, tell me about the bottleneck in your origin source that is preventing you from breaking through. Xuehe poured out all of his bottlenecks in one breath. In fact, he was very close to becoming a Tao master, but he was stuck at a point he couldn't break through. Cultivating here in this place of insight might speed up the process, but it would still take him 100,000 years to completely break through. After breaking through, his next goal would be to become an emperor, but for him, that seemed so distant it was incalculable. Even reaching the peak of the Tao master level could take him 1,000,000 years. That was longer than the time it took for the ancient domain world to come into existence. There was nothing he could do about it. His talent was limited, and his origin source had long been fixed. No one could change that. The only way was through postnatal modification. Jian Wushuang, upon hearing the words, had a bright light shoot out from the center of his brow. That was his thought power, the stream of light entering Xuehe's body. It transformed into a phantom image of himself, beginning to guide Xuehe. Relying on his guidance, in just a single day, Xuehe would evolve into a Tao master. At the same time, Jian Wushuang accelerated the flow of time. This place was deep within the origin source of the universe, and using the 9-prison pagoda, he could accelerate the time here. To the outside world, it was but a moment, but in that instant Xuehe's origin source became complete, and he ascended to become a Tao master. Thank you for your guidance, Lord. Xuehe, overwhelmed with excitement, knelt and expressed his gratitude. Guardian Yunhai and the others were equally astonished as they discovered that Xuehe had already become a Tao master. In their hearts, they were all shaken by Jian Wushuang's ability to help Xuehe reach Tao master level so quickly. It was terrifying. If Jian Wushuang desired, he could recruit countless true immortals and help them ascend to become Tao masters. That would make him the most powerful force in the entire ancient domain, far surpassing any sacred land or ancient court. It would drive people mad. At the same time, they began to wonder just how powerful Jian Wushuang truly was. He must be at the level of an emperor, and even more powerful than the Holy Lord. It was only due to some reason that his current realm had regressed. By helping Jian Wushuang achieve his great revival, they would surely become his trusted followers. At that moment, they all made a decision to serve Jian Wushuang until he returned to his former glory. Jian Wushuang waved his hand nonchalantly and said, "No need to thank me. First, hand over all the treasures you possess. These things will interfere with the self-sacrifice ceremony." Yes, without hesitation, Xuehe handed over all the items he had to Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang wasn't particularly interested in Xuehe's meager treasures, but it was mainly to show the others. Now, I will help you sacrifice yourself and become a silver puppet. With that, Jian Wushuang deliberately refined the treasures Xuehe handed over, then took out a drop of silver liquid and placed it on Xuehe's brow. In an instant, Xuehe's entire body turned silver. Ah! A powerful energy surged through Xuehe's origin source. In the blink of an eye, his origin source was filled with silver blood. From inside out, his entire being turned silver. Even his eyes became silver. At the same time, his immortal power completely disappeared, replaced by divine power. Divine power surged tenfold. In one breath, it grew 100-fold. In 2 breaths, it grew 1,000-fold. In 3 breaths, it grew 10,000-fold. It simultaneously reached its peak. Phew! Xuehe exhaled, feeling the incredible strength within his body. Although this power had no roots, he could now absorb treasures to restore his divine power. In reality, there wasn't much of a difference. A cultivator was like a flowing wellspring of water, but after the self-sacrifice, they turned into a dead well. The logic was simple, but executing it was very difficult. Xuehe clenched his fist and felt an unprecedented sense of fulfillment. After expressing his gratitude to Jian Wushuang, he glanced at Guardian Yunhai and the others. When he unleashed his 10,000-fold divine power, it gave everyone a fright. This opportunity one received is all thanks to your recommendations. I, Xuehe, am deeply grateful. Though Xuehe appeared humble, the confidence in his words far surpassed anything from before. Guardian Yunhai and the others no longer dared to underestimate Shui He. Brother Shui, it's truly a case of long-awaited success. Of course, we should thank our Lord for bestowing this upon you. Guardian Chiefing responded politely. Chu Xiong, on the other hand, was feeling a bit conflicted. He had once looked down on Shui He, but now Shui He had surpassed him in an instant. Although he had some hope of surpassing Shui He in the future, it would take an extremely long time. Haha, of course I know this is all thanks to our Lord. That's why I will strive to serve him before any of you. Shui He's tone grew increasingly assertive after his polite words. Seeing their hidden competition, Jian Wushuang smiled inwardly. This was the result he had wanted all along. Don't celebrate too soon. The Shui He sacrifice ritual hasn't been completed yet, Jian Wushuang said, feigning sternness. Hearing this, Shui He was a bit surprised and responded, Yes, Lord. Though somewhat confused, he lowered his head respectfully and stood quietly to the side. Jian Wushuang stood with his hands behind his back and explained, The silver puppet is merely the weakest form of the sacrifice ritual. I have even stronger versions that I haven't used yet. Now, I will begin the second sacrifice. Second sacrifice? Shui He widened his eyes in disbelief. The others were equally astonished. They hadn't anticipated there being a second form of sacrifice. What kind of power would that entail? The silver puppet already wielded divine power 1,000-fold. Beyond that, could it possibly reach the power of an emperor? None of them could quite believe it, including Shui He. However, he was the most excited of them all. Being able to grow stronger was, of course, an immense benefit to him. Even the three puppets standing behind Jian Wushuang showed expressions of surprise. They knew their current master could perform the sacrifice ritual for a golden puppet. Are you ready? Jian Wushuang raised his hand. I'm ready, Shui He responded respectfully. No sooner had the words left his mouth than Jian Wushuang made his move, transforming instantly into a universe god of the God Eye clan. Focusing all his divine power, Jian Wushuang condensed a drop of golden blood, combining it with his silver divine blood. The process caused his aura to tremble and diminish slightly. But that drop of golden blood landed on Shui. Because the divine blood originated from Jian Wushuang, once Shui He became a golden puppet, he would instinctively develop a sense of loyalty toward Jian Wushuang. This loyalty wasn't born of gratitude or the strength of Jian Wushuang's power. It was the recognition from the enslavement by Jian Wushuang. Shui He would now regard Jian Wushuang as his master. Everything would be in service to Jian Wushuang's interests. Even if it meant sacrificing his life, he would obey without question. Shui He's entire body, which had been silver, turned golden, just as it had felt moments before. But now his divine power had increased fourfold. His divine power now stood at 50,000-fold. He had surpassed the strength of an emperor. For a peak expert, possessing divine power of 50,000-fold was exceptional. At that moment, Shui He clenched his fists and lifted his head, his eyes erupting with a powerful pressure. This pressure stunned everyone present. Except for Jian Wushuang, of course. Guardian Yunhai and the others, who had once regarded Shui He as an equal, now looked at him with deference. Shui He had become far too powerful for them to match. Shui He, take your time to familiarize yourself with your new power. Controlling 50,000-fold divine power isn't easy. Jian Wushuang reminded him with a calm voice. His words were meant for the others as well. But the rest had already been scared speechless. Regret washed over them, their faces pale with dismay. If an intense aura struck them now, they might faint from the shock. Regret. I regret it so much. Why wasn't I the one to perform the sacrifice? If I had only taken a step forward, I'd be the one with 50,000-fold divine power now. Is it still too late? At this moment, Guardian Yunhai and the others were filled with regret. Earlier, Jian Wushuang had asked for volunteers, and if they had stepped forward, they could have become the golden puppet themselves. No one regretted it more than Chu Xiong. His talent was the highest among them, but even so, the chances of him becoming an emperor were slim. Even if he trained to the peak of Dao fusion, how easy would it be to actually achieve Dao fusion? And even if he succeeded, how strong would he become? A first-stage emperor's divine power would only reach 5,000-fold. However, most emperors could enhance their power to the second stage by mastering the God Eye techniques. In this world, the God Eye techniques were far more powerful than the Dao techniques from Qishan Temple. A second-stage emperor possessed divine power of 10,000-fold. This was on par with heaven-defying Dao lords. Many of the emperors in the ancient court held this level of power. Next came the third-stage emperors. The peak of third-stage emperors, with the help of the God Eye techniques, could unleash divine power of 20,000-fold. Fourth-stage and fifth-stage emperors wielded divine power of 30,000-fold. A sixth-stage emperor had divine power of 40,000-fold. The pinnacle absolute peak had divine power of 50,000-fold. However, 50,000-fold divine power was just the starting point in this world. Take, for example, the powerful Ilwan, who had cultivated the third transformation of the God Eye technique. It was estimated that his divine power could erupt to 80,000-fold, easily comparable to the power of a tribulation expert. Even though human cultivators were not as powerful as those of the God Eye clan, they could still exert a divine power of 60 to 70,000. The five-fold divine power of the golden puppet wasn't the strongest among the absolute peaks, but it could easily crush any emperor, effortlessly. Shui old ancestor had grown from a true immortal to an absolute peak warrior. It took less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea. From obscurity to being revered by tens of thousands. When Shui old ancestor looked again at Guardian Yunhai and the others, a trace of disdain flashed in his eyes. Jian Wushuang was very satisfied with this. The effect he wanted had arrived. Actually, this time it wasn't all for those treasures, but rather to have these people offer their lives. When the time came, it would be time to head to that secret realm mentioned by the One Luan and search for the universe-floving boat. He would also need some helpers by his side. He couldn't do everything by himself. Shui, make your preparations here. From now on, follow me closely. Shui old ancestor responded with utmost reverence. Yes. All right, for now that will do. You can go ask the other true immortals. If anyone else wants to offer their lives, let me know. There are still plenty of spots available now, but once the numbers grow, there might not be any left. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly, adding a reminder. Oh, and Yunhai, don't relax. Since you've chosen the path of cultivation, you must work hard. Don't disappoint my expectations. Become an emperor soon and help me with tasks. The benefits will be endless. After saying that, he turned around, ready to leave. Guardian Yunhai could no longer hold back. He crawled to Jian Wushuang's feet, pleading, Lord, I am willing to offer my life. Please grant me this favor. Lord, I no longer wish to put in effort either. Guardian Qifeng hurried over as well. Seeing this, Chu Xiong and the other two guardians couldn't maintain their composure any longer. They immediately knelt and requested to offer their lives as well. Watching as everyone was so willing to sacrifice themselves, Jian Wushuang was very pleased. Are you all certain? We are certain. We will not hesitate in the slightest. Everyone nodded in agreement. At the same time, they brought out all their treasures, waiting for Jian Wushuang to refine them and transform them into puppets with divine blood. Since you no longer wish to put in effort, I will grant your wish. Jian Wushuang took out 5 drops of silver blood and placed them on the foreheads of the group. In an instant, the 5 had successfully offered their lives. Golden divine blood requires my power to condense. Do not worry. In a few days, I will help you offer your lives with golden blood. After speaking, Jian Wushuang's true form had already departed. Only his avatar remained. After thanking him once again, the group also appeared somewhat anxious. After all, Shui old ancestor had already become a golden puppet. 5-fold divine power. Outside in the auction house. At this point, the treasures of the first stage had all been auctioned off. Zhou Chun had handed over all the treasures he brought to Huang Yuer, who would later present them to Emperor Duobao for auctioning, one by one.